Abigail Carter was already on her knees in the mud when she heard the hoofbeats. She didn't think. She ran straight into the road, waving both arms, screaming at the rider, thundering toward the bridge she knew was broken, the same bridge no one had believed her about that morning. The horse reared. The man cursed. And Abigail stood there, soaking wet, chest heaving, refusing to move. She had no idea she was looking up at the man who would one day ask her to be his wife. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Subscribe to this channel and follow Abigail's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The morning it all began, Abigail Carter had been awake since 4 o'clock. Not because she couldn't sleep. She rarely slept well anymore. But because the sound she'd heard in the night, a low underwater groan coming up through the creek bed like something ancient shifting in its bones, had pulled her out of her bedroll and sent her walking alone down to Barrow's Crossing before the sun had any business being in the sky. She stood at the edge of the bridge for a long time. The water was moving wrong. She could see it even in the gray pre-dawn light, the way the current pushed against the eastern pillar with too much force, the way the wood where it met the stone had turned the color of a bad tooth. She crouched down and pressed her palm flat against the nearest plank and felt it a faint vibration, like something underneath had already given way, and the rest was just waiting for permission. Abigail straightened up and looked both ways down the road. Empty. She pressed her lips together and started walking back toward Calvert's boarding house, where she'd been renting the smallest room for 3 weeks now, ever since the bank in Mill Haven had taken her father's land and left her with one trunk, one horse, and a sum of money that wouldn't carry her through winter. She moved quickly, the way she always did when she was alone and thinking hard. People in Sutter's Creek had opinions about the way Abigail Carter moved. She'd heard them since she was 14 years old. Too slow, too heavy, too much. Her mother had died when she was 8, and her father, God rest him, had never once made her feel like her size was something to be ashamed of. He'd taught her to rope cattle and read water tables and judge a horse's temperament by the way it held its ears. He'd told her she had the best eye for land he'd ever seen, man or woman. But Daniel Carter had been dead for 4 months, and his opinions didn't keep anybody warm. Chester Pruitt was sitting on the porch of the feed store when Abigail came up the main street, and he started talking before she'd even reached the step. Lord Almighty, Abigail Carter, you go swimming before breakfast now. She stopped. Her dress was muddy from the knees down. Her boots squelched with every step. Barrow's Crossing is failing, she said. The eastern pillar's been undermined. I could feel it through the planks. That bridge won't hold another heavy load. Chester Pruitt was 62 years old and had lived in Sutter's Creek since before the railroad came through. He had strong opinions about weather cattle prices and the reliability of young women who showed up at his feed store, looking like they'd wrestled a creek. Abigail, he said slowly, the way men said a woman's name when they wanted her to understand she'd gone too far. That bridge has stood since 1861, and the water's been rising for 3 weeks, she said. The current changed direction after the storm in June. I saw it. The pillar on the east side has shifted. You can see the gap if you look at the water line. Chester glanced at the 2 men sitting beside him. One of them, Tom Greer, who ran the livery, snorted into his coffee. You think you know more about this bridge than the men who built it, Tom said. I think I know what I felt through my hands this morning, Abigail said. I think someone should go look. I think before Halloran sends his supply wagon through today, someone should ride down there and check. Chester rocked back in his chair. Halloran's wagon goes through that crossing 3 times a week, has for years. Then this is the week somebody should look first. Neither man moved. Abigail stood there another moment. She could feel the back of her neck getting hot, not from embarrassment. From something older and harder than that, the specific exhaustion of being right and being disbelieved, which she had experienced so many times now that it had its own particular weight, like carrying a stone she couldn't put down. All right, she said quietly. I've told you what I know. What you do with it is your business. She walked away. She heard Tom Greer laugh behind her. Fat girl thinks she's a bridge engineer, he said, and Chester made a sound that was almost a chuckle before he caught himself. Abigail kept walking. She spent the morning doing what she'd been hired to do, which was not nearly enough work, and she knew it. Mrs. Calvert had given her a position helping in the kitchen, which meant she earned barely enough to cover the cost of her room and left her nothing for food most days, except what she could take from the kitchen scraps without being seen. She wasn't ashamed of it. She was angry, which was different. Her father's land had been 430 acres of the finest grazing ground in the county, and it was gone now because the bank had called a note that should have had another year on it. And the man who'd co-signed that note, a man named Orson Weller, who had been her father's closest friend, had disappeared 2 weeks after Daniel Carter's funeral without a word to anyone. Abigail suspected things about Orson Weller that she couldn't prove. She thought about him every night when she was falling asleep in the narrow bed in the narrow room, and she made herself stop thinking about him because the anger made it hard to breathe, and she couldn't afford to be anything less than completely functional right now. She was kneading bread dough when she heard the sound. It came from the direction of the creek, a low, cracking percussion, like the sound of a tree falling, except deeper, more final. Abigail dropped the dough, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked out the back door. From the rise behind this boarding house, you could just see the glint of the creek through the cottonwood trees. She shaded her eyes. The bridge was still standing, but the sound kept going. A slow, rhythmic creak, like something enormous breathing its last. And then she heard hoofbeats. She was running before she knew she'd decided to run. The road from the north came down a long slope before it curved toward Barrow's Crossing, which meant a rider coming from that direction wouldn't see the state of the bridge until they were almost on top of it. Abigail knew this road. She'd ridden it with her father 100 times. She knew exactly how little time a person had. She came around the curve of the cottonwoods and saw him, a man on a dark horse riding hard, moving like someone who had somewhere to be and wasn't in the habit of slowing down for anything. The bridge shuddered. She could see it from where she stood, a visible tremor in the planks, a sideways lean in the eastern railing that hadn't been there this morning. Abigail ran into the road. She didn't have a plan. She had about 4 seconds and 2 working arms and a voice that had never been described as small. "Stop!" she screamed. "Stop your horse, the bridge is!" The rider saw her. The dark horse threw its head and reared hooves, cutting the air not 10 feet from where she stood, and Abigail held her ground, because there was no time to do anything else. She kept her arms out and her eyes on the horse's eyes, the way her father had taught her, and she willed the animal to settle, and after one long heart-stopped moment, it did. The man in the saddle looked down at her. He was somewhere in his late 30s. She registered that first, and then the rest. Tall in the saddle, dark-haired under a weathered hat. Jaw set, like he'd been interrupted in the middle of something important and was deciding whether to be angry about it. He had gray eyes the color of creek water in winter, and they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and measured the voice of a man who didn't raise it often. "You want to tell me why you just jumped in front of my horse?" "I want to tell you that bridge is about to fail," Abigail said. She was breathing hard. She could feel her heart going at twice its normal speed. "The eastern pillar has been undermined. I've been trying to warn people since 4 o'clock this morning, and nobody listened, and I'd rather you be angry at me than be in the creek." He looked past her at the bridge. As if to settle the argument, the eastern railing gave a long, groaning shudder and dropped 6 inches on one side. The rider was off his horse and standing beside her before the echo died. He was taller than she'd thought. He moved fast for a big man, quietly, efficiently, like someone who'd spent a lot of years covering ground in a hurry without making noise about it. He walked to the edge of the crossing and crouched down exactly the way she had that morning and pressed his hand to the plank, and Abigail watched his face change. "You felt that this morning," he said. "Yes." "And nobody went to look?" It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "No." He stood up. He looked at the bridge for another moment, then looked back at her. "My name is William Hawthorne," he said. The name landed on her like a stone dropped into still water. William Hawthorne. Everyone in 3 counties knew that name. He owned Hawthorne Ranch, 12,000 acres on the other side of the Calico Hills, the biggest cattle operation in the territory. His family had been here since before Colorado was a state. His father had built the first permanent house in this valley with his own hands. And he was standing in the mud next to Abigail Carter, looking at her like she was somebody. "Abigail Carter," she said. She didn't offer her hand. Men like William Hawthorne didn't shake hands with women who looked like her as a general rule. "My father was Daniel Carter out of Millhaven." Something moved across his face. She couldn't tell what it was. "Carter," he said slowly. "Dan Carter's girl." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked back at the bridge. "We need to stop anyone else from using this crossing," he said. "I've got a supply wagon coming through here by midday." "Halloran's." He glanced at her. "You know Halloran's route." "I know most of the freight routes in this county," she said. "My father ran supply wagons for 15 years. I grew up learning them." William Hawthorne considered her for a moment. "All right, Miss Carter," he said. "What do you know about the road on the north side of the ridge?" By the time they'd flagged down Halloran's wagon and redirected it around by the long way, which added 2 hours to the route and cost Abigail most of what little goodwill she had with Mrs. Calvert, who needed the flour. Halloran was carrying the whole town had turned out to see the bridge. Or rather, to see what was left of it. The eastern pillar had given way sometime in the late morning, and half the bridge had listed into the creek at an angle that made everyone wince. It was a spectacular failure visible from the main street, and it had the whole of Sutter's Creek talking. Abigail was not part of that conversation. She was back in the kitchen. Her apron retied her hands back in the bread dough when Chester Pruitt came in through the back door of the boarding house with the look on his face of a man who has swallowed something unpleasant. Abigail, he said. She kept kneading. "I heard you tried to warn us this morning," he said. "I did warn you this morning." He was quiet for a moment. "Tom Greer's saying it was going to fall anyway. Says it had nothing to do with what you—" "Chester." She stopped kneading and looked at him. "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for anything. I told you what I saw. The bridge fell. That's the end of it." His jaw worked. "Hawthorne's here. He's asking about you." "Then tell him where I am." Chester blinked. That was apparently not the response he'd expected. He opened his mouth, closed it, and left. William Hawthorne filled the kitchen doorway, the way substantial men filled doorways, not threateningly, just completely in a way that reorganized the whole room around him. He took off his hat. That surprised her. Men didn't always take off their hats for women like Abigail Carter. "Mrs. Calvert let me come back," he said. "I hope that's all right." "It's her kitchen," Abigail said. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hawthorne?" He came in a few steps. He looked at her for a moment in a way that wasn't unkind and wasn't anything else she could name yet. Like he was making a calculation. "I want to know how you knew," he said, "about the bridge." "I told you. I felt it this morning." "You felt it through the planks. And I saw the change in the current. And I know what that kind of water does to a foundation over time." She paused. "My father taught me. We surveyed water routes when we were planning freight runs. You have to know where the weak spots are before you commit a loaded wagon to a crossing." "Your father trained you for that." "He trained me for everything he knew," she said. "He didn't have sons. He had me." Something shifted in William Hawthorne's expression. Something quiet. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. "Daniel Carter was a good man. I bought my first remuda from him. He knew horses the way—" He stopped. "I was sorry to hear he'd passed." Abigail pressed her lips together and nodded. She wasn't going to cry in front of this man. She hadn't cried in front of anyone since the funeral, and she wasn't starting now. "Thank you," she said. He turned his hat in his hands. "I'd like to offer you work, Miss Carter." She stopped. "At the ranch," he said. "I need someone who can read terrain and water and who understands freight movement. I've been having problems with my cattle routes, losing time and losing animals, because the men I've got don't know this land the way they should, and I've got a water situation that's been giving me trouble all summer." He paused. "I'll pay fair wages. A private room in the bunkhouse separate from the men. 3 meals a day." Abigail was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the narrow bed and the kitchen scraps and the sound of Tom Greer laughing behind her back. "What kind of water situation?" she said. "The main creek that feeds my eastern pasture has been running low since May. My men think it's just the drought. I think something's changed upstream, but nobody's been able to find the problem." "How far upstream have you checked?" 3 miles. "How far does your land go?" 7 miles from the house." "Then you haven't looked far enough," she said. He watched her. "If I take this position," she said carefully, "I need to be clear about something. I'll work hard. I know how to work, and I don't need anyone to carry me. But I won't be treated like a joke. If your men decide to make sport of me, I'll leave, and you'll lose both the money you paid me and whatever problem I was about to solve for you. I've lived through that enough times to know it's not worth either of our while." William Hawthorne looked at her steadily. "My men work for me," he said, "and I don't run that kind of ranch." "All right," she said. "All right. All right, Mr. Hawthorne, I'll take the position." She arrived at Hawthorne Ranch 2 days later. She had one trunk, one horse, a sturdy gray mare named Clover, that her father had given her 3 years ago, and that she would have sold before any other possession she owned, and a set of surveying tools that had belonged to her father, wrapped carefully in canvas and packed at the very bottom of the trunk, where nothing could shift against them. The ranch was bigger than she'd imagined, even having heard the stories. The main house sat on a rise with a view of the valley that on a clear day probably went 30 miles in every direction. The outbuildings were well kept. The fencing was good. She noted these things because she noted everything. It was a habit she'd had since childhood, the need to understand a place completely before she could feel safe in it. The hands were gathered near the barn when she rode in, and she felt their attention the way you always felt it. Not threatening exactly, just present. The weight of people deciding what you were before you'd said a word. A man came out from among them, red-haired, stocky, with the look of someone who'd been foreman long enough to feel territorial about it. "Miss Carter," he said. "Not warm, not cold, assessing." "That's right. I'm Cody Marsh, foreman." He looked her over. She felt it, she always felt it, and then he looked at Clover. Something shifted in his expression when he looked at the horse. Respect, maybe. Grudging. "Good-looking animal," he said. "She is," Abigail agreed. "Where do you want me to start?" That surprised him. She could see it. He'd been expecting something else, nerves maybe, or an attempt to win him over. "Mr. Hawthorne said you'd want to look at the East Creek first," Cody said slowly. "I do. Can someone show me the property line on the north side? I want to know where I can go without trespassing." "I'll take you," Cody said. And there was something different in his voice now, still wary, but a fraction more open. They rode for 2 hours before she found it. Cody was with her, and 2 other hands whose names she'd learned were Pete Calloway and a young man called Jesse, who couldn't have been more than 19, and who kept stealing glances at her with an expression that was mostly curiosity and a little bit wonder, like he'd never seen anything quite like her before. She'd seen the sign from 100 yards out, the color of the grass on the north bank, too green for a drought year, and the angle of a particular stand of cottonwoods that meant water was collecting where it shouldn't be. She got down from Clover without a word and walked to the creek bed and crouched beside it and looked for a long time. Then she looked upstream, then downstream. "There's a beaver dam," she said. "Or what used to be one. Somebody's added to it on purpose. Look at the construction on the north side that's not natural. Those are cut branches stacked in a pattern. Someone redirected the flow. Probably 3-4 weeks ago, judging by how the mud settled." Cody dismounted and came to stand beside her. He looked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Why would anyone do that?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But whoever it was wanted your east pasture to dry out, which means they either wanted your cattle to suffer or they wanted you to think the land was bad." She looked up at him. "Who owns the land north of your property line?" Cody's face went very still. "Royce Alderman," he said. Abigail filed that name away and stood up. "Then that's where I'd start looking," she said. She told William that evening. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. She'd learned that most men interrupted before you'd finished, not always out of rudeness, but out of the habit of believing they already knew what you were going to say. William Hawthorne sat across the table from her in the main room and listened to every word she said, and when she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "Alderman," he said. "Do you know him well?" "Well enough." His jaw tightened. "He's been trying to buy my East Quarter for 2 years. I've said no twice." "Then he decided to make it worthless to you instead," Abigail said. "That's a serious accusation." "I know." She met his eyes. "I'm not making it without evidence. But I think if you send someone up to where that dam's been modified and look carefully at the cut branches, you'll find they were cut recently and with a saw, not an axe. That's not how beaver work, and it's not how ranchers work water when they're being careless. That's someone being deliberate." He looked at her for a long time. "You learned all this from your father," he said. "From my father, and from 18 years of paying attention," she said. "People don't think I'm watching. They don't expect it. That's usually when you see the most." Something moved in his expression, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "I reckon they don't," he said quietly. She had been at the ranch for 5 days when she heard the first of it. She was carrying water from the barn pump in the early morning, a chore nobody had assigned her. She'd simply noticed it needed doing when she heard 2 of the hands talking on the other side of the barn wall. "Can't figure what the boss is thinking," one of them said. She thought it was the one called Pete. "Bringing her out here. Woman's got some knowledge, I'll give her that," the other said. "The thing with the creek. The creek could have been a lucky guess." Pete's voice was flat. "You really think Hawthorne's going to take advice from— I mean, look at her, Jessie. What does a woman like that know about running cattle?" There was a pause. "She knew about the creek," Jessie said. He sounded younger than he had before, less certain. The voice of someone trying to hold a position they weren't sure about yet. "Anybody could have spotted that," Pete said. "Doesn't mean she belongs here. Doesn't mean the boss ought to be—" "Ought to be what?" That was a third voice, and it was low and quiet, and every syllable of it was absolutely still. The conversation on the other side of the wall stopped entirely. Abigail held very still. "Ought to be what Pete," William said again. Silence. "I asked you a question." "Just talking, boss," Pete said. His voice had changed completely, gone from flat to careful in the space of a heartbeat. "I heard what you were talking about," William said. "You want to finish that thought out here in the open where Miss Carter can hear it? You go ahead. I'll wait." Another silence. Longer. "No, sir," Pete said. "No," William agreed. "I didn't think so. Get to your chores." She heard boots on gravel, and then silence, and then William's voice, quieter now, just on the other side of the wall from where she stood. "Miss Carter," he said. "I know you're there. You can come out whenever you're ready." She came around the corner of the barn. She was still carrying the water buckets. She didn't put them down. He looked at her. His face was difficult to read, but his eyes were steady. "I don't need protecting," she said. "I've heard worse than that." "I know you have," he said. "That's not why I said it." She studied him. "Why did you say it?" "Because Pete works for me," he said simply. "And what he says about someone on my property reflects on me. That's how I run things." He paused. "And because it was wrong. That's the second reason." Abigail looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her water buckets. "I found where Alderman's men have been crossing onto your land," she said. "There's a fence line on the northeast corner that's been cut and repaired so many times the posts are loose. They've been coming through regularly, I'd guess at least once a week." She looked up. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she still couldn't entirely name. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said. "You should come see it yourself," she said. "You should know your own land that well." "I should," he agreed, and that was all. She walked away toward the barn, but she was aware with a precision that had nothing to do with the water she was carrying that he watched her go. The day she solved the water problem completely, the whole ranch knew about it by sunset. She'd gone back to the modified dam with Cody and 3 other men and demonstrated exactly what she'd known from the beginning, that the flow could be restored in a single afternoon if you knew where the blockage was and how to dismantle it properly. It took 4 hours of hard wet work. Abigail worked alongside the men the entire time, wading into the creek to direct the placement of removed material, hauling cut branches, making decisions about which parts of the natural dam to preserve and which to clear. By the time the water was running free again toward the east pasture, even Pete Calloway was quiet. Jesse came and stood beside her as she watched the water move. "How'd you know all that?" he said. "My father," she said. "He teach you everything." Everything he could. She watched the water for a moment. He said knowledge doesn't care who holds it. Said the land doesn't give a damn whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you weigh 120 pounds or twice that. You know what you know, or you don't. Jesse was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a good way to think about it." "It's the only way I know how," she said. That evening, William Hawthorne came to find her where she was brushing down Clover in the stable. I didn't say anything at first. He stood at the stable entrance and watched her work, and Clover, who was particular about strangers, didn't shift away from him. Abigail noted that. "East pasture is drinking," he said finally. "Good," she said. "You know what that creek being restored means for this ranch, for the cattle?" "I have some idea." "It means winter." He said it simply, like the word contained everything. "It means we make it through winter." Abigail kept brushing Clover's flank. Her hands were steady. "Then I'm glad I was useful," she said. "Miss Carter." His voice made her look up. He was leaning against the stable door, arms crossed, hat low. "In 17 years of running this ranch, I have never had anyone walk in here on the third day and solve a problem. I'd been losing sleep over for 3 months. She held his gaze. "I notice things," she said. "It's not magic. It's just attention. Most people don't pay that kind of attention. Most people aren't used to being underestimated," she said. "When people don't think you're worth watching, you learn to watch everything." He was quiet for a moment. "What happened to your father's land?" he said. The question was quiet, but it wasn't idle. There was something deliberate in it, like a man who'd been thinking about asking for a while and had decided to do it now. Abigail went still. Then she started brushing again, slow and even. "The bank called the note," she said. 4 months after he died. Said it was past due, though my father always paid on time. The co-signer, a man named Orson Weller, had disappeared. Without Weller, there was no one to verify the original terms of the loan. She paused. "I couldn't fight it alone. I didn't have the money or the legal standing, so I lost it." Silence. "Orson Weller," William said slowly. Something in his voice made her look up. His face had changed. Not drastically. This was a man who kept himself very controlled, but something was moving behind his eyes. "You know that name," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a long moment. "I might," he said carefully. "I'm not certain yet, but I'd like to look into something if you'll allow me." "Why?" "Because your father was a good man," he said. "And because what you just described doesn't sound like a bank error." Abigail stared at him. She had thought those words in exactly that order every night for 4 months. She had not said them out loud to anyone, because saying them out loud made them real, and making them real meant she had to do something about them, and she'd had no resources, and no allies, and no way to fight. She was quiet for a long time. "All right," she said. "You can look." He nodded once and pushed off from the doorframe. "Get some rest, Miss Carter," he said. "You've more than earned it." How was 3 steps gone before she spoke again. "Mr. Hawthorne." He stopped. "Why did you take my hat off this morning?" she said. "When you came into the kitchen at the boarding house, you didn't have to do that." He turned just enough to look back at her over his shoulder. "Because you were owed that much," he said. "At least." He walked out. Abigail stood in the quiet of the stable with her hand on Clover's flank, and her heart making a sound she hadn't heard it make in a long time. Not grief, not anger, not the particular weariness of being perpetually underestimated. Something else entirely. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. But it was there. And for the first time in 4 months, standing in a stranger's stable, at the end of a very long day, Abigail Carter felt something that was almost cautiously distantly like hope. The next morning came hard and early, the way mornings always did on a working ranch, and Abigail was already dressed and thinking before the first rooster had finished his opinion about the day. She lay on her back in the narrow cot in the small room William had given her at the end of the bunkhouse, separate from the men as promised, with a latch on the door that actually worked, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about Orson Weller. She thought about him the way she always did, when she let herself methodically without anger, the way her father had taught her to survey difficult terrain. Start at the edges. Work inward. Don't assume you know the shape of the thing before you've walked all the way around it. Orson Weller had been her father's friend for 22 years. He'd been at their table for Sunday dinner so many times she'd stopped counting by the time she was 12. He'd bounced her on his knee when she was small enough for that, and later when she was older, he'd talk to her about crops and weather and cattle prices like she was worth talking to, which most men didn't bother doing. And then her father had gotten sick, and Orson Weller had co-signed a banknote that should have given them breathing room. And 2 weeks after the funeral, Orson Weller had saddled his horse and ridden away from everything he'd ever known in this county, and nobody had seen him since. She'd asked herself 1,000 times whether she could have missed something. A sign. A warning. Some small thing her father had said or not said that should have told her what was coming. She never found it. And now William Hawthorne had made a sound when she said Orson Weller's name. A very particular sound, the sound of a man who recognizes something he wasn't expecting to recognize, and he'd said he wanted to look into something. She didn't know what that meant, but she'd learned in 25 years of watching people that there was a difference between the things men said to make women feel better and the things they said because they meant them. William Hawthorne said very little, which meant that when he said something, it was because he'd decided it was true. She got up. She put her boots on. She went to work. The ranch had its own rhythm, and she'd been watching it for 5 days now with the same attention she'd given everything in her life, taking it apart and putting it back together in her mind until she understood how the pieces fit. The men rotated in shifts. The cattle on the South Range needed moving by the end of the week, or the grass would be overgrazed. The horses in the second paddock were showing signs of something not sickness, exactly more like unease that she hadn't been able to pin down yet, but intended to. She was at the paddock fence before 7 o'clock watching the horses. Jesse came up beside her about 10 minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her without saying anything. She took it. "Thank you." "You always up this early?" "Usually earlier," she said. He stood beside her and drank his coffee and watched the horses. The youngest one, a sorrel gelding about 4 years old, kept circling the same patch of fence, stopping circling again. "He been doing that long," Abigail said. "Couple days," Jesse said. "Marsh says it's nothing." "It's not nothing." She kept her eyes on the gelding. "Something's gotten into the paddock at night. Something small, a dog maybe, or a coyote. It got under the fence, spooked him, and he hasn't settled since. You'll want to check the south fence line for tracks." Jesse stared at her. "How do you know it was at night?" he said. "Because he's not afraid right now," she said. "He's remembering being afraid. There's a difference in how a horse carries that." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "My daddy had horses," he said. "He never talked about them like that." "Most people don't," she said. She finished her coffee and handed the cup back. "Check the south fence." She walked toward the barn. Behind her, she heard Jesse immediately change direction toward the south fence, and she allowed herself a small private satisfaction that had nothing to do with being right and everything to do with being heard. She found the problem with the cattle routes by midday. She hadn't been asked to look into it. William had mentioned it when he'd offered her the job, and she'd filed it away and waited until she had enough of the land in her head to approach it properly. Now she walked the East Range with a piece of paper and a stick of charcoal making marks on the paper that meant things she'd explain later. The problem was simple. Once you saw it, the men were taking the cattle on the same path every single day, which meant that path was getting cut up and hard, and the cattle were losing energy, fighting the terrain when they didn't need to. The alternative route, a slightly longer way around the rocky cut, using the softer ground near the creek, now that the water was running again, would add 15 minutes to the drive and save the animals 4 times that in wasted effort. She found Cody Marsh at the corral. He saw her coming, and his face did a thing it had been doing since the creek. A small involuntary adjustment, like a man who's been wrong about something and is still deciding how he feels about that. "Got a minute," she said. "I got work," he said. "This is about the work." She showed him the paper. He looked at it for a moment. His jaw moved. "You changed the cattle route," he said. "I suggested a change to it," she said. "You're the foreman. You make the call." That landed right. She watched him straighten slightly. "Why?" he said. She explained it straightforward, no extra words, the way she'd learned men responded best when they weren't expecting a woman to know what she was talking about. The terrain, the energy loss, the simple math of it. When she was done, Cody was quiet. "Could save us a week of feed come November," he said slowly. "Yes." He took the paper out of her hand and looked at it for another moment. "I'll think on it," he said. She knew what that meant. He'd already decided. He just needed to arrive at it in his own time. "That's all I'm asking," she said. She was 3 steps away when Cody said, "Carter." She stopped. "The boss was right to bring you," he said. He said it to the paper, not to her face, but she heard it clearly. "I ain't saying that again, so don't make me." "I won't," she said, and kept walking. She was at the water trough behind the main barn when Pete Calloway made his first real move. She'd been expecting something from Pete. Men like Pete Calloway didn't go quiet all at once. They went quiet long enough to regroup, and then they came back with something sharper. She'd met enough of them to know the shape of it. He came around the corner of the barn with 2 other men. She'd learned were brothers, Dale and Roy Sims, and they all 3 had that particular configuration of a group that hasn't decided yet whether they're going to be cruel or just unpleasant. "Miss Carter," Pete said. The way he said it was wrong too smooth, the kind of polite that was a wrapper for something else. "Calloway," she said. She kept filling the trough. "Heard you changed the cattle route. I suggested a change. Marsh made the call." "Uh-huh." He leaned against the fence. The Sims brothers spread out a little, not threatening exactly, but aware. "You know, we had a woman out here about 6 years ago, ranch cook. She got ideas too. Started telling the hands how to do their jobs." He paused. "Didn't work out for her." Abigail straightened up and looked at him. "That's a very interesting story," she said. "Is there a part of it that's relevant to me, or did you just want someone to tell it to?" One of the Sims brothers made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Pete's eyes went flat. "You think you're smart," he said. "I think the east pasture is watered, and the cattle route is better than it was," she said. "I think whatever you thought about me before I got here doesn't change any of that." She picked up the water bucket. "And I think I've got work to do, Calloway, same as you, unless you don't." She walked between them, and they let her, which was the important thing. She didn't look back. She kept her breathing steady and her steps even, and she didn't let any of the thing that was climbing up the inside of her chest show until she was on the other side of the barn and out of their sight. Then she stopped and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She was so tired. Not of the work she could do in her sleep. She was tired of the other thing. The performance of being unbothered. The constant calculation of how much you could say and how firmly you could say it before the men around you decided you'd overstepped and made you pay for it. She was tired of carrying that math everywhere she went. She let herself be tired for exactly 30 seconds. Then she pushed off the wall and went back to work. She was writing in her notebook by lamplight that evening when William knocked on her door. She knew his knock, she'd already learned it without trying to. The way you learned the particular sounds of a place you were starting to belong to. 2 knocks even-spaced, and then he waited. "Come in," she said. He came in, which he'd done twice before, when he needed to discuss something, and he stood the way he always stood, easy, not crowding the space hat in his hands. "I need to show you something," he said. She looked at him. There was something different in his face tonight. Not worried exactly. Careful. "All right," she said. He led her to the main house and into the study at the back, which she'd only seen through the door before. It was a working room, not a showroom. Papers on the desk, maps on the wall, the smell of old leather and lamp oil. He spread something on the desk in front of her. It was a land survey. Old, the paper was yellow at the edges, and next to it a more recent document, a bank record. She looked at both of them for a long time. "Where did you get this?" she said. "I rode to Millhaven today," he said. She looked up. "You were in Millhaven?" "I know a man at the county record office," William said. "We grew up together. He let me look at the files on your father's property." Abigail's heart was beating faster. She looked back at the documents. "The original survey," she said slowly. "This is my father's land. But this boundary line," she stopped. "This boundary line on the original survey doesn't match what the bank is claiming." "No," William said. "It doesn't. The bank is claiming 40 acres more than the original survey shows." She traced the line on the paper with her fingertip. If the boundary was redrawn, then the original loan amount would be different. The note would be different. She looked up. "The terms my father agreed to aren't the terms they're enforcing." William was watching her face. "Tell me about Orson Weller," he said. "I told you." "Tell me again." "Everything." She did. She sat down in the chair across from his desk and told him everything she knew, which wasn't as much as she wanted it to be, but more than she'd ever told anyone before, because she'd never had anyone to tell who seemed likely to do something with it. When she finished, William was quiet for a long time. "Weller works for Alderman," he said. The words hit her like cold water. "What?" "I didn't know it for certain until today," he said. "But I had a feeling when you said his name. I've seen Weller twice in the last year, both times on Alderman's property. I didn't know who he was, just a face. Today when I described him at the county office, my contact confirmed the name." Abigail sat very still. "Orson Weller works for Royce Alderman," she said. "Has for at least 2 years," William said. "Possibly longer." She thought about the dam. The deliberately redirected water. The fence that had been cut and repaired so many times, the posts were loose. The systematic, patient pressure of a man trying to acquire something that didn't belong to him. "He went after my father's land," she said. "And then he went after yours." "Yes," William said. "Except yours he got." The words were quiet, and they were true, and they landed on her like something physical. She'd known it. She'd known it in the way you know the things you're not yet able to prove, bone deep and sleepless and furious. But knowing it and having it confirmed were two different weights. "I can't prove it," she said. "Not with what we have." "Not yet," he said. "You'd need Weller himself or someone who can confirm the boundary survey was altered." She looked at the documents. "And you'd need someone at the bank who was either complicit or willing to say they were pressured. That's—" She stopped. "That's a long road." "I know," William said. "You don't have to do this," she said. "This isn't your fight." He looked at her steadily. "Your father sold me some good horses, Miss Carter. And whatever else is true about this county, there is one thing that has always been true in my house. You don't let a man steal from someone who can't fight back and call it business." Abigail looked at him. She had been on her own for 4 months. 4 months of narrow beds and kitchen scraps and men laughing behind their hands, and the bone-grinding work of keeping herself functional when half of her wanted to lie down and stop. 4 months of being entirely, completely alone with the knowledge of what had been done to her family. She was not going to cry. She absolutely was not going to cry in William Hawthorne's study in front of the land survey that proved her father had been cheated. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. He nodded once. "Get some sleep," he said. "We've got a long cattle drive starting in 3 days, and I need you sharp." She stood and moved toward the door. "Miss Carter." She stopped. "You said you'd leave if my men made sport of you," he said. "Are they?" She thought about Pete Calloway at the water trough. The flat eyes. The thinly wrapped threat. She thought about Jessie handing her coffee in the early morning. About Cody Marsh saying she was right without saying it to her face. about the sorrel gelding that was already moving better now that she'd had someone check the south fence. "Not in any way I can't manage," she said. He held her gaze. "Let me know if that changes," he said. "I will," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her. 3 days later, the cattle drive began, and everything Abigail had suspected about Pete Calloway became something she could no longer manage quietly. It started on the first morning of the drive on the new route she'd mapped, the gentler path around the rocky cut that Cody had approved, and that had already proven itself twice in smaller drives. The cattle were moving well. The weather was holding. Abigail was on Clover, working the left flank the way she'd done since she was 16, reading the herd, the way her father had taught her, watching the ears, watching the spacing, watching the small signals that told you which direction the group mind was leaning before it became a decision. Pete Calloway appeared at her left shoulder. "You're too far forward," he said. She was exactly where she needed to be. She knew that. But she also knew this tone, the tone of a man who wasn't making a ranching observation, he was making a different kind of point. "I'm where the flank needs me," she said. "Cody wants you back." She looked across the herd. Cody Marsh was riding point 200 yards ahead. He hadn't looked back. He hadn't signaled anything. "I'll check with Cody myself," she said. "I'm telling you what he said. And I'm telling you I'll confirm it with him directly," she said, keeping her voice level. "That's not an insult to you, Calloway. That's just how I work." His horse moved closer. Not enough to be called aggression. Just enough. "You know what your problem is," Pete said low enough that the men around them wouldn't easily hear. "You think this situation's permanent. You think because you found the water and Hawthorne's feeling grateful you've got a place here." He paused. "You don't. You're temporary. Same as every other woman who ever thought a man's kindness meant something." Abigail kept her eyes on the cattle. Her hands on the reins were steady. "Are you done?" she said. "I'm being straight with you," he said. "More straight than you'll get from him. He'll use what you know and send you on when he doesn't need it anymore. That's what men like Hawthorne do." She turned and looked at him then, fully directly without flinching. "Calloway," she said, "I've been underestimated by better men than you, and I'm still standing. So you go ahead and think whatever you like about my place here. The cattle don't care about your opinion, and neither do I." She pressed her heels into Clover's sides and moved forward. Pete Calloway didn't follow her, but she could feel the back of her neck for the rest of the morning. The trouble came at midday. The herd was moving through the narrow passage between the rocky cut and the creek, exactly the kind of terrain that could go wrong quickly if something spooked the animals. Abigail had been watching the sky all morning. The weather was behaving, but there was something else, a smell faint and wrong coming from the north side of the ridge. She pulled Clover up and raised her hand. Jesse, riding 20 yards back, saw her and slowed. "What is it? Do you smell that?" she said. He lifted his head. His face changed. "Smoke. From the north," she said. "Wind's coming from the northeast. If there's a grass fire on the upper ridge." She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. Jesse was already riding hard toward the front of the herd to find Cody. Abigail stayed where she was and thought fast. The cattle were already sensing something. She could feel it in the way the left flank was starting to push inward, that subtle bunching that happened before animals decided to move in a direction nobody wanted. If the fire was on the north ridge and the wind shifted, the smoke would come down into the passage and the herd would panic. And a panicked herd in this particular passage, with rock on one side and creek on the other, had exactly one way to go, which was forward and fast, which meant anyone at the front of the drive was in serious danger. She turned Clover and rode hard down the left side of the herd, cutting behind the trailing cattle, and came up on the right flank, where two of the Sims brothers were riding. "Roy," she said, "push your side in. We need to compress the herd toward the center before they start deciding anything on their own. Do it now before they smell it." Roy Sims looked at her, then looked at Dale. Some kind of wordless brother calculation happened. "You sure?" Roy said. "I'm sure. Now please." Roy nodded and began working his horse into the cattle. She turned and did the same on her side, pushing Clover in close. Using her voice, using the animal's body, doing the 100 small physical things that added up to herd control. She could feel the animals responding reluctantly at first, and then better. She could also feel the wind shifting. "Cody!" she shouted loud enough for it to carry. "Get the lead moving now. Don't stop at the water, push them through." Cody's voice came back distant but clear. "What's happening?" "Fire on the ridge. Move the herd through the passage before the wind turns." There was a moment, one of those moments where everything in a situation hangs on, whether the right person makes the right decision fast enough. And then she heard Cody's whistle and the sound of the lead cattle beginning to move faster. The smell of smoke got stronger. The herd felt it. The left flank began to push. "Hold them!" Abigail called to Jesse, who'd come back to her position. "Don't let them turn push right. Keep them moving forward." Jesse worked his horse hard. He was better than she'd given him credit for, quick and instinctive, the kind of young rider who'd been taught well, even if he didn't always know how much he knew. The next 12 minutes were the kind that didn't have room for anything except the work. Pure, undistracted effort, horse and body and voice and judgment, all of it moving at once. No time to think about Pete Calloway, or Orson Weller, or the narrowness of her bed, or any of the other weights she carried. Just the herd and the passage, and the smell of smoke getting closer, and the sound of Cody's voice from the front, and the thunder of cattle moving through. When the last animal cleared the passage and the herd spread out into the open ground on the other side, Abigail pulled Clover up and let herself breathe. Jesse came up beside her. His hat was sideways. He was grinning. "That," he said, slightly breathless, "was something." "That was standard," she said, but she was breathing harder than she wanted to admit. William was there 3 minutes later. He'd been riding drag and had pushed forward when he heard the shout. He pulled up on her right side and looked at the herd and then at her. "You smelled it first," he said. "Yes." "How far ahead of the shift?" "Maybe 4 minutes," she said. He looked at the herd. He looked at the ridge where a thin line of smoke was visible now against the sky. He looked at her. "4 minutes," he said. "That's the herd." "I know," she said. I was quiet for a moment. "Pete was supposed to be watching that flank," he said. She didn't answer. He didn't push it. But she saw his jaw set in a way that meant the conversation with Pete Calloway was going to happen, and it wasn't going to be brief. That evening, the hands made camp in the open ground, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Hawthorne Ranch, nobody kept a deliberate distance from where Abigail sat. Roy Sims brought her coffee. Jesse sat down next to her without being invited, which somehow felt like its own kind of compliment. Even Cody Marsh, who expressed approval, approximately. The way a winter mountain expressed warmth, came and sat across the fire from her and said nothing for a long time, and then said quietly, "Good thinking today," and went back to his coffee. She ate the food that was passed to her. She drank the coffee. She felt for the first time since her father's death something that was almost belonging. Not fully, not without question. She knew better than to trust the feeling too completely, but almost. Pete Calloway was on the far side of the camp, noticeably quiet, and whatever William had said to him had apparently been sufficient because he didn't come near her all evening. William sat across the fire from her, and they didn't talk for most of it, just sat with the fire between them and the sounds of the camp around them. But once toward the end of the evening, when the other men had started drifting toward their bedrolls, he looked up and caught her watching the flames. "What are you thinking about?" he said. She almost said nothing. It was habit she'd spent years keeping her thoughts to herself because nobody had ever asked, and the ones who hadn't wanted the real answer. "I'm thinking about my father," she said instead. "He would have liked this drive." William looked at the fire. "He would have been good at it," he said. "He would have," she agreed. She paused. "He always said the best thing you could do in this territory was make yourself necessary. Not indispensable, he was very particular about the difference. Indispensable was about making people need you. Necessary was about actually solving the problems in front of you." She looked at the fire. "He said the land always knows the difference." William was quiet for a long moment. "Smart man," he said. "The smartest person I ever knew," she said. And then, because the firelight made honesty easier than lamplight did. I miss him every single day, and I am so angry about what happened to him that I don't always know what to do with it. She hadn't meant to say that last part. William looked at her. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, he said. Tonight you saved the herd. That's enough for one day. She looked at him. Mr. Hawthorne, she said slowly, can I ask you something personal? He waited. You said you'd been disappointed in love, she said. Someone told me that one of the hands. I'm not asking for the story, but I'm wondering, does it make it harder to trust the people who work for you? To trust anyone? He was quiet for longer than she expected. Yes, he said finally. It does. He turned his hat in his hands. I had a woman years ago. She was beautiful, and she was funny, and she made everything seem lighter. And she left because this life was too hard, and too isolated, and too much work for too little return. He paused. She wasn't wrong. She just chose different. He looked at the fire. After that, I stopped expecting things from people. It seemed simpler. And now, she said. He looked at her. In the firelight, his face was different, younger somehow, or maybe just less armored. Now I'm not sure simple is the right measure of a thing, he said. They sat with that for a moment. Then the fire popped, and Jesse laughed at something from across the camp, and the moment passed back into ordinary evening, and Abigail finished her coffee and thought that William Hawthorne was considerably more complicated than anyone in Sutter's Creek had given him credit for. She thought she probably was too. The second day of the drive brought Royce Alderman. She'd never seen him before, but she knew who he was the moment he appeared on the ridge to the east with 4 riders behind him, because men who wanted things always arrived like that, slightly above everyone else at a moment designed to make the impression they intended. Howe was older than she'd expected. 60 maybe. A big man gone to thickness with age but still carrying the suggestion of what he'd been, broad-shouldered, heavy-handed, the kind of man who'd built his reputation on never being told. No, often enough to believe it applied to him. He rode it down to where William was at the front of the drive, and they talked. She was too far back to hear it, but she could read it, the angle of William's shoulders, the way he held very still, which she'd learned was what he did, instead of showing anger. The way Alderman gestured toward the herd, with a proprietary sweep of his arm. Jesse came up beside her. What's he saying? Jesse said. Nothing good, she said. Cody appeared at her other side. He'd already seen Alderman, and his jaw was doing the same thing Williams usually did. Alderman's claiming the South water rights, Cody said quietly. He's been threatening it for a year, saying the creek that feeds the South pasture is on his land. Is it? Abigail said. No, Cody said flatly. But he had a survey done 6 months ago that says different. Paid somebody to draw it however he wanted it drawn. She thought about the old survey document on William's desk, the boundary line that didn't match. He does that, she said. That's his pattern. Cody looked at her. You know something, he said. It wasn't a question. I know some things, she said. Not enough yet. She watched William on the ridge. He was saying something to Alderman, now Short measured the words clipped the way William's words got when he was doing the hardest kind of restraint. Alderman smiled, which was worse than if he'd argued. She pressed her heels into Clover's sides and moved forward. Carter, Cody said sharply. She kept going. She rode up the slope and stopped Clover beside William's horse. Alderman looked at her. The men looked at women they hadn't been introduced to and didn't expect to have to deal with a brief dismissive flicker. Who's this? He said. Miss Abigail Carter, William said. His voice was carefully level. She manages my land and water routes. Alderman's eyebrow rose. It was the kind of rise that contained a whole speech. Carter, he said slowly. Dan Carter's girl from Millhaven. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a moment with something she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not concern, not anything that simple. More like a man doing a rapid calculation. I heard about your father, he said. Shame about the property. Yes, she said. It was. These things happen in hard times, he said. A man takes on too much debt. The debt was manageable, she said pleasantly. until the terms were altered. But I expect you know more about that than I do, Mr. Alderman. Complete silence. William was very still beside her. Alderman's eyes went flat. I don't know what you think you're implying, young woman, he said quietly. I'm not implying anything, she said. I'm being direct. I find it saves time. She kept her voice light, conversational. Now I understand you're claiming water rights to the South Creek. I'd be very interested to see the survey that supports that claim. Specifically, I'd like to compare it to the original county survey from 1867, which I've recently had occasion to look at. She paused. I find these documents fascinating, don't you? The way a line drawn in the wrong place can change everything. Alderman looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at William. Interesting hire Hawthorne, he said. She's the best I've ever had, William said. Alderman turned his horse without another word and rode back up the ridge. His men followed. She and William sat side by side and watched them go. Then William said very quietly, You want to tell me what just happened? I told him I'd seen the county survey, she said. I wanted him to know that someone's looking. You put a target on yourself. I put a target where it belongs, she said. He already went after my father without being looked at. He's been going after you without being looked at. I'd like him to know that's changing. She looked at William. Was that wrong? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, but be careful. I'm always careful, she said. You just walked your horse into a conversation with Royce Alderman and told him you knew about his surveys, William said. That's not what careful looks like. It's what necessary looks like, she said. My father's word. He looked at her. Then he almost smiled, not quite, but almost, which she was starting to understand was as close as he usually got. Your father's word, he said. He was smart about these things, she said. He raised you, William said simply. That's evidence enough. She turned Clover and rode back toward the herd. Her heart was going considerably faster than she wanted it to, and it had nothing to do with Royce Alderman. The cattle drive finished on the fourth day, and they brought the herd home with every animal accounted for, which Cody said had not happened on the last 3 drives, and which Jesse celebrated by letting out a whoop that startled the nearest horse into a sideways skip. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, tired and satisfied in the particular way that hard physical work produces a fullness that has nothing to do with comfort, and everything to do with having done something real. Pete Calloway rode apart from the group the whole last day. Whatever William had said to him hadn't exactly created goodwill, but it had created silence, and at this particular moment, Abigail was willing to accept silence as sufficient. When they rode through the ranch gate, William's housekeeper, a solid, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Arden, was waiting at the front of the main house. Mrs. Arden had made her opinions about Abigail known mostly through silence, which was its own kind of vocabulary. She hadn't been rude, she was too controlled for that, but she'd been deliberate about the distance she kept. The way she'd handed Abigail her room key without quite making eye contact. The way she referred to her as the Carter woman when she spoke to other staff. Now she looked at Abigail as the riders dismounted and said, Miss Carter, you have a visitor. Abigail looked up. I'm sorry. A man, Mrs. Arden said. He's been waiting since yesterday morning. He said he'd wait as long as it took. A pause. He said his name was Orson Weller. Everything in Abigail's body went absolutely still. She heard William dismount beside her. She heard the sound of his boots on the ground. She looked at the main house. Where is he? She said. Front porch, Mrs. Arden said. She handed Clover's reins to Jesse without looking at him. She walked toward the house. She heard William's steps behind her, not crowding her, not directing her, just there, and she was aware of him in a way that was distinct from awareness of anyone else. Something she'd been trying not to examine too closely for the better part of a week. There would be time for examining things later. Right now, there was a man on the porch who had helped destroy her father's life, and then disappeared, and he'd come back, and she needed to know why. She came around the corner and saw him. He was older than she remembered, thinner. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept well in a long time, which she supposed was either guilt or trouble, and she intended to find out which. He saw her coming, and he stood up, and his face did something complicated, relief and shame, and something that might have been fear, all moving at once. "Abigail," he said. She stopped 6 feet from him. "Orson," she said. Her voice was completely level. "You have about 30 seconds to tell me why you're here before I decide what to do about it. I'd start talking if I were you." Orson Weller looked exactly like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally put it down in the wrong place. I was 61 years old, thin in the way of recent illness rather than natural build, and his hands, which Abigail remembered as the broad, capable hands of a working farmer, were restless at his sides, moving and stopping and moving again, like they couldn't find anywhere safe to land. "I need you to know," he started. "I said 30 seconds, Abigail said. "You've used 4 of them." He stopped. Behind her, she could feel William's presence, not intervening, not directing, just there, steady as a fence post, and she was grateful for it in a way she couldn't have explained. "I didn't know what Alderman was going to do," Orson said. "When I co-signed the note, I thought it was a legitimate arrangement. He told me it was a favor to your father. He told me—" His voice broke at the edge, and he pulled it back. "He said Dan was overextended and needed a guarantor, and that he'd hold the note quietly and not call it unless your father missed 3 payments in a row." "My father never missed a payment," Abigail said. "I know that now." "You knew it then," she said. "You knew my father. You ate at our table for 20 years. You knew he was the most careful, most responsible man in that county." "I did know that." Orson's jaw worked. "And I told myself that meant everything was fine, that Alderman wouldn't, that he had no reason to—" "He had 430 acres of reason," Abigail said. "Prime grazing land with a water source that hasn't dried in 30 years. He had every reason in the world, and you handed him the key." The silence was complete. Even the horses had gone quiet. Orson Weller looked at her with the face of a man who had rehearsed some version of this conversation 100 times and found that the real thing was nothing like the practice. "I ran because I was afraid," he said. "I knew what I'd done, what I'd let happen, and I ran because I was a coward, and I have been ashamed of it every day since." "Shame doesn't get my father's land back," she said. "No," he said, "but I can." She didn't invite him inside immediately. She made him say it twice standing on the porch because she needed to hear it more than once to believe it was real. What Orson Weller had was a letter. A letter written by the bank officer who had processed her father's loan, a man named Gerald Frost, who had since died, but whose widow was living in Millhaven with a box of her late husband's papers that she'd never been able to bring herself to go through. In that box, according to Orson, was a copy of the original loan document with the original boundary survey attached, signed by both Daniel Carter and Gerald Frost, with a handwritten note from Frost himself, indicating that the boundary had been adjusted per Mr. Alderman's direction after the initial signing. Adjusted per Mr. Alderman's direction. "You've seen this letter," William said. He'd moved up beside Abigail when she'd gone still. His voice was careful and quiet. "I've read it," Orson said. "Frost showed it to me 3 months before he died. I think he felt guilty. I think he wanted someone to know. He made me promise not to use it while he was alive because he was afraid of Alderman." Orson paused. "He died in February. And you've been sitting on this since February," Abigail said. "I've been trying to figure out how to come forward without—" He stopped. "Without what?" she said. "Without getting killed," he said quietly. The word landed flat and real. William moved. Not aggressively, but he shifted his weight in a way that changed the entire geometry of the porch. Suddenly he was more present, more fully there, and Abigail understood without being told that this was what it looked like when William Hawthorne decided something mattered. "Tell me what you know about Alderman," William said. His voice had dropped to something very level. "All of it. Not just about the Carters. About his operation. About how he works." And Orson told them. Chug. It took 2 hours. They moved inside William's study, the lamp turned up, Mrs. Arden bringing coffee that nobody drank while it was hot, and Orson Weller talked, and Abigail sat across from him and listened with every part of herself she knew how to listen with. Alderman had been doing it for 15 years. That was the scope of it. 15 years of identifying the most valuable parcels of land in 3 counties, finding the men who owned them, and engineering situations that made those men vulnerable. Bad debt-forged surveys, pressured bank officers, co-signers who didn't understand what they were agreeing to. Her father had not been the first. He had not been the last. There were 7 other families she recognized by name. 3 she'd grown up knowing. 1 had a daughter Abigail had gone to school with until she was 14. She sat with that. She sat with the specific particular weight of learning that the worst thing you'd always suspected was not only true, but was larger than you'd imagined it to be. "He's been after Hawthorne Ranch for 3 years, Orson said. He looked at William. "You're the biggest target he's ever attempted. The water rights alone are worth more than everything else he's taken combined." William was very still. "The survey he had done," William said. "The one claiming the South Creek." "Manufactured," Orson said flatly. "Same man who altered the Carter's boundary. A surveyor out of Denver named Pickett, who does this kind of work for whoever pays him enough. He's done 4 jobs for aldermen that I know of." "Pickett," William said. "You know him." "I know his name," William said. "He submitted the survey to the county 6 months ago. My lawyer filed a challenge but said it could take a year to resolve." He paused. "Unless there's documentation that proves the survey was fraudulent." Everyone in the room arrived at the same thought at the same moment. Orson looked at Abigail. "If Frost's widow still has the letter," he said. "She does," Orson said. "I spoke to her last month. She doesn't fully understand what's in the box, but she's willing to let someone look. She's 72 years old, and she's been afraid of that box for 8 months." "We go to Mill Haven," Abigail said. She looked at William. "We go to Mill Haven," he agreed. They left at first light. William, Abigail, and Cody Marsh, because William didn't go anywhere with active legal stakes without Cody, who had the specific focused loyalty of a man who had worked for the same person for 11 years and intended to keep doing so. Orson came too, which Abigail was not entirely comfortable with. She rode beside him for the first hour without speaking. Then she said, not looking at him, "Why did you really come back?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I was dying," he said. "Before you say anything not from aldermen. My heart. The doctor says I have maybe a year." He kept his eyes on the road. "And I didn't want to die with this on me." She took that in. "I'm not going to tell you that I forgive you," she said. "I'm not there yet. I may not get there." "I know," he said. "But I'm glad you came," she said. "Not for my sake. For the other families. For everyone else he did this to." Orson nodded. They rode the rest of the way to Mill Haven without discussing it further. Mrs. Frost was a small woman with white hair and very sharp eyes that had been crying recently but were not crying now. She opened the door of the narrow house in Mill Haven's east quarter and looked at the 4 of them on her porch and said, "I was wondering when someone was coming." She led them to a bedroom in the back, where a wooden box sat on the floor beside the wardrobe, exactly where she'd apparently left it since her husband's death. "He told me not to throw it away," she said. "He told me that the papers inside would matter someday to someone who needed them. He didn't explain more than that." She looked at Abigail. "You're Dan Carter's girl." "Yes," Abigail said. Mrs. Frost looked at her for a moment. Something moved across the old woman's face. "Gerald talked about your father. He said Dan Carter was the best man he ever did wrong by, and that was going to go with him to his grave." She paused. "I didn't know what it meant. I think I do now." She stepped back and left them to the box. Abigail knelt on the floor and opened it. The paper was there. Third from the top, folded in thirds, and sealed with wax that had long since dried to powder at the edges. She unfolded it carefully, the way she'd handle anything irreplaceable, and read it. And there it was. Gerald Frost's handwriting, cramped and careful. The handwriting of a man who'd been a meticulous record-keeper his whole career. The original loan terms. The original boundary survey, attached with a rusted pin. And at the in handwriting that was slightly different, less careful, more pressured, 3 lines that changed everything. Boundary adjusted per Alderman Directive, 14 March 1879. Survey redrawn. Original retained herein as record. God forgive me. GF. Abigail read it twice. Then she sat back on her heels and pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose very deliberately until she was sure she wasn't going to do anything embarrassing. William crouched beside her. He didn't say anything. He read the note over her shoulder and was quiet. Then he put his hand on her shoulder just briefly, just for a moment, the weight of it there, and then gone, and said nothing at all. It was enough. They were back on the road to Sutter's Creek by early afternoon, and by the time they reached the edge of Hawthorne's land, the sun was low and the sky had gone the color of old copper, and Abigail was holding the folded paper inside her coat against her ribs like something living. She was also thinking. The letter proved Alderman had manipulated the survey on her father's land. With Orson's testimony and Pickett's name in Orson's account, it also connected Alderman to the pattern of fraudulent surveys in the county. It was not on its own enough to get her father's land returned the legal process, for that would be long and difficult, and not guaranteed. But it was enough to challenge Alderman's claim on William's South Creek. And it was enough to begin a formal inquiry into his operation, which meant Alderman would know. Soon. He'll move quickly when he finds out, she said. William looked at her from beside her on the road. I know. He'll try to discredit Orson. He'll claim the letter is forged. He'll go after anyone who might testify. She paused. He might go after you directly. He might, William said. You don't seem concerned. I'm concerned, he said. Concern and panic are different things. She thought about that for a moment. What do we do first? She said. First, William said, we get that document to my lawyer in the county seat before Alderman's people know we've been to Millhaven. He paused. Cody rides tonight. Orson goes with him. He's the witness, and he needs it to be somewhere. Alderman can't reach him until we're ready. Another pause. And you stay at the ranch? She looked at him. I'm not staying at the ranch while... Not because I'm protecting you, he said. Because you're the one who understands the land situation here, and if Alderman decides to make a move on the south pasture while I'm dealing with the legal side, I need someone at the ranch who knows what they're looking at. She considered that. That's a reasonable argument, she said. I know, he said. I still don't love it. I know that too, he said. They made it back to the ranch as dark was settling, and Cody rode out again within the hour with Orson and the copy of the letter that William's hand had made at Mrs. Frost's table, a careful, complete transcription that they'd had Mrs. Frost witness and sign before they left. The original stayed with Abigail. She didn't sleep. She sat at the small table in her room, with the lamp low and the original letter in front of her, and thought about her father. She thought about him sitting across from Orson Weller at that table, signing a document he believed was a fair arrangement between friends. She thought about how he'd never once complained in the months before he died, even when the drought was bad and the prices were low and the work was grinding. He'd just kept going. He'd just kept working. She thought about the way he used to say when she was small and something had gone wrong. This too shall pass, Abby, and when it does, you'll know you were strong enough. She pressed her thumb carefully against the dried wax seal at the edge of the letter. She was strong enough. She just needed the situation to stay stable long enough for the legal process to do what it was supposed to do. It didn't. Pete Calloway came to her door at 6 in the morning. She'd been up for an hour, dressed and watchful, and when she heard his knock, 2 hard raps urgent, she was across the room before the echo died. She opened the door. Pete Calloway's face was wrong. Not hostile. The hostility was gone, entirely replaced by something she hadn't seen on him before. Something that looked a lot like alarm. What is it? She said. Alderman's men, he said. South fence, 6 of them. They're pulling posts. She was at the door before he finished the sentence. She could hear it from 50 yards out. The particular sound of fence posts being worked loose from ground that didn't want to give them up. Metal against earth, the rhythmic creak of wire going slack. She pulled up 30 feet from the fence line. 6 men. Alderman's brand on the horses. They were working methodically, pulling posts in a line, and the foreman of the group, a heavy-set man with a gray hat, she didn't recognize was watching the work with the careful attention of someone executing a specific plan. "Hey!" she called out. The gray-hatted man looked up. He took his time about it. "Ma'am," he said. The title was technically respectful and completely wasn't. "That's Hawthorne fence," she said. "You're on Hawthorne land." "We're on Alderman land," the man said pleasantly. "Per the survey filed with the county 6 months ago, this fence was erected on the wrong side of the boundary. We're correcting the error." "That survey is fraudulent," she said. "There's a legal challenge on record." "There is," he agreed. "Mr. Alderman's lawyers say the challenge has no merit. Until a judge rules otherwise, the survey stands." He smiled. It didn't reach anything above his chin. "Ma'am." She looked at the men working the fence, at the posts already pulled, at the wire, looked at the gray-hatted man. "My name is Abigail Carter," she said. "My father was Daniel Carter, and Royce Alderman stole his land using exactly the same kind of fraudulent survey you just cited. We have documentation proving it, signed by the original bank officer. Witnessed." She kept her voice completely even. "I am telling you that because I want you to understand what you're participating in. I want you to be able to say later that someone told you." The man's smile didn't disappear exactly. It just became less certain. "Pull the next post," he said to his men. She rode back to the ranch. Jesse met her at the barn. He'd followed her out, which she hadn't told him to do, and he'd heard the whole exchange from 20 yards back. "What do we do?" he said. His voice was taut. "Where's Hawthorne?" she said. "Rode out at 5 to the east quarter, checking the water." "Go get him," she said. "Now, hard ride." Jesse went. She stood in the middle of the yard and thought fast. If Alderman was moving on the fence today, it meant he already knew about Millhaven, which meant he had eyes in this county that she hadn't fully accounted for, which meant the window they had before he found a way to neutralize the letter was shorter than she'd hoped. She went to the main house and found Mrs. Arden in the kitchen. "I need paper," she said. "And I need to know if there's anyone on this ranch who can ride to the county seat faster than Cody Marsh." Mrs. Arden looked at her. It was the first time the woman had looked at her fully directly, without the buffer of careful neutrality. "Jesse's faster," she said. "But Mr. Hawthorne." "Mr. Hawthorne needs to know first," Abigail said. "I know. I sent Jesse to get him." She paused. "And I need you to know that I'm not making decisions that aren't mine to make. I'm trying to hold the line until he gets back." Mrs. Arden was quiet for a moment. "I know you are," she said. And then simply, "The papers in the study drawer." William came back at a hard gallop 30 minutes later. He came into the yard and was off his horse and standing in front of her before the animal had fully stopped, which told her everything she needed to know about what Jesse had communicated on the ride out. "How many men?" he said. "6 at the south fence," she said. "Pulling posts on the boundary line. Armed, sidearms, nothing displayed." His jaw was doing the thing. "Legal challenge. Doesn't stop them from working while it's pending. Their lawyer told them to move now before the judge rules." She looked at him steadily. "They know about Millhaven. Someone told them. We have less time than we thought." He absorbed that. "I need to ride to town," he said. "I know. I need you here. I know that too." She held out the paper she'd written on. "I've drafted a statement of what I witnessed at the fence this morning. Time, number of men, exact actions, what was said. If you can get it witnessed and filed at the sheriff's office today, it creates a legal record of the incursion before Alderman can characterize it differently." She paused. "It also gives the judge something concrete to look at when he rules on the challenge." He took the paper and read it. He read it the way. He read everything she gave him completely, without skimming, giving it the full weight of his attention. "This is good," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "Same thing coming from you." He folded the paper and put it inside his vest. "I'll take Jesse. We'll be back by nightfall." He looked at her. "Carter." "Hawthorne." "If Alderman's men come back, I'll document everything," she said. "I won't engage. I'll send someone after you if the situation changes." She met his eyes. "I know what I'm doing." "I know you do," he said, and then quieter. That's not what I was going to say. She waited. I was going to say be careful. Not because I think you need telling. Because I... He stopped. He looked at her in the early morning light with the expression she'd been trying not to examine too closely for 3 weeks now. Just be careful. You too, she said. He held her gaze for 1 moment longer than necessary. Then he turned and called for Jessie, and in 5 minutes they were gone, and Abigail was standing in the yard with the whole ranch watching her without appearing to watch her, and she understood that this was what it felt like to be the person everyone was waiting to take the lead. She was 30 seconds out here. Then she turned to Roy Sims, who was the nearest hand. Roy, she said, get Dale and whoever else is on the south side and go watch that fence line. Don't touch anything, don't confront anyone. Just watch and count and remember everything you see. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, Roy said. And then without irony or performance, just simply, yes, ma'am. The day was long and tight and full of waiting, which was its own kind of hard work. Alderman's men came back to the south fence twice more. They pulled 4 more posts. They were careful and legal about it, working just inside what the fraudulent survey claimed was their boundary. Doing nothing that could be called violent doing, everything that could be called deliberate. Abigail watched. She sent Roy and Dale to watch. She documented every post, every wire, every timestamp she could estimate. She kept the ranch hands calm, which took more effort than the documentation, because men who had worked a piece of land for years did not take calmly to watching someone systematically dismantle the edge of it. Pete Calloway surprised her. He came and stood beside her in the early afternoon, watching Alderman's men work the fence, and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I owe you an apology. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the fence line. I was wrong about you. I was wrong from the start, and I've been wrong in ways I'm not proud of. His jaw was tight. I thought you were here because Hawthorne felt sorry for you. I thought... He stopped. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. She studied him. Why? She said. Because you knew about the smoke before any of us. Because you walked up to Alderman on that ridge without blinking. Because you're out here right now doing the right thing when most people would be inside making excuses. He looked at her then finally. And because I'm a man who prides himself on reading people, and I got you completely wrong, and that means I need to say so. She was quiet for a moment. All right, Calloway, she said. Apology accepted. He nodded once. Good, he said. They stood together and watched the fence and didn't say anything else, and it was one of the better silences she'd had in a long time. William and Jessie came back after dark. She heard the horses in the yard and was out of the main house before either of them had dismounted, which she was not going to examine in the morning. William's face told her before he spoke. The judge is willing to hear an emergency motion, he said. Day after tomorrow, Cody's meeting us there with Orson. If Orson's testimony holds and the letter stands up. He paused. My lawyer thinks we have a real chance at an injunction against the survey. That stops the fence work legally. Day after tomorrow, she said. Yes. Alderman's men came back twice, she said. I have documentation. Exact times posts pulled everything Roy and Dale observed. He took the pages she held out. Of course you do, he said. Don't say it like that, she said. Like what? Like it's remarkable, she said. It's just work. I did the work. He looked at her, and there was something in it that went past the professional respect they'd been carefully maintaining for 3 weeks, something that sat in a different register entirely. It's remarkable, he said. And it's also just work. Both things are true. She didn't have an answer for that. She looked at the yard, at the men unsaddling the horses, at the ordinary nighttime sounds of the ranch settling. There's something else, William said. His voice had changed slightly. What? My lawyer ran a check on the other properties Orson mentioned, he said. The family's alderman's done this to before. He paused. 2 of them want to come forward. If the judge grants the injunction and the inquiry opens, 2 other families are prepared to submit their own documentation. She stared at him. 2 families, she said. So far, he said. My lawyer thinks there may be more who'll come forward once the first crack appears. She looked at the darkness over the ridge. She thought about 7 families, about the one she'd grown up knowing, about the girl she'd gone to school with until she was 14, about all the land that had been taken and the reputations that had been damaged and the quiet, systematic violence of it all, dressed up in legal language and survey documents, and the patience of a man who knew how to wait. "He built a whole operation," she said. "He did," William said. "And he's been doing it for 15 years because nobody ever pulled all the pieces together." "Yes." "Until now," she said. "Until now." William agreed. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, fully meant, made something in her chest do a thing she couldn't entirely account for. She looked at him. "We have to win this," she said. "I know. Not just for the ranch, for all of them." "I know, Carter," he said. His voice was very gentle. "I know." She didn't sleep again that night. She sat with the lamp and the list of names Orson had given her: 7 families, 7 parcels of land, and she thought about what it would mean if the inquiry succeeded. About land returned and reputations restored, and the particular relief of being believed after years of being told you'd imagined the wrong. She thought about her father. She thought about William saying, "I know, Carter, I know," in that voice. She went to the window and stood there for a long time. The moon was high, and the ranch was quiet, and somewhere out there in the dark beyond the south fence with its missing posts, Royce Alderman was sitting somewhere making his own calculations about how much time he had left. She thought not much. She thought, "You should have left my father alone." She thought, "Tomorrow we go to the county seat, and the day after that we go before the judge, and whatever happens in that room, at least someone is finally going to look." She pressed her hand flat against the cool glass of the window and thought of her father pressing her hand to the bridge plank in the early morning dark, teaching her to feel what was wrong beneath the surface. "The land always tells you the truth," he'd said. "You just have to be willing to put your hands on it and listen." She'd been listening her whole life, and now, finally, she was starting to be heard. The morning of the hearing. Royce Alderman made his move. She found out about it from Roy Sims at 5:30, who'd heard it from the overnight hand, who'd come in from a patrol of the south fence at 4 in the morning with news that changed the shape of everything. Alderman wasn't just contesting the legal challenge. He was making a direct claim filed that morning with the county court before dawn, through a lawyer who'd apparently been awake all night, that William Hawthorne had encroached on Alderman land, not just at the south fence, but at the water source. That the East Creek, the one Abigail had restored 3 weeks ago by dismantling the modified dam, ran through Alderman property and had been illegally redirected by Hawthorne's employees, which meant that the work she had done the dam, she'd analyzed the blockage, she'd cleared the water, she'd sent back to the east pasture, was being characterized as trespassing and property destruction. Which meant Abigail Carter was now personally named in a legal filing. She read the document. Roy brought her a copy that Alderman's man had apparently left at the ranch gate like a letter, and she sat with it for 30 seconds. Then she went and woke William. I was already awake. He read the document standing in the doorway of his room, still in his shirt sleeves, and his face went very still. In a way she'd come to understand, meant he was angrier than he was going to show. "He named you," William said. "He's trying to separate us," she said. "If I'm facing a personal legal challenge, I'm distracted. I'm defensive. I'm not helping you prepare for the hearing." She looked at him steadily. "That's what this is. It's a move to take me off the board." William was quiet. "He doesn't know you very well," he said. "No," she said. "He doesn't." "We ride in 2 hours," he said. "You're riding with me. Your name being on that filing doesn't change the strategy. It makes our case stronger, because it proves he's responding to the threat we represent." He held her gaze. "This is good news, Carter. It means he's scared." She thought about that. She thought about a man who had operated without opposition for 15 years, and was now for the first time looking at a room full of people who had documentation and witnesses and the willingness to stand up. "You're right," she said. "I usually am," he said, and it was so unexpected, that small, dry, almost humor, that she laughed. Actually laughed, the real kind, the kind that surprised her on the way out. He smiled, not the almost smile. The real one. She'd never seen it before. It changed his whole face, made him look like the version of himself he kept stored somewhere out of general circulation. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, she agreed. She went to get dressed, and she was halfway down the hall before she realized she was still smiling, and she made herself stop, and then she thought about it for 5 more steps and let herself smile again. Just for those 5 steps. Then she put it away and went to work. The county seat was a town called Harlan, 20 miles east, on a road that Abigail knew because her father had run freight through it once a month for years. She rode beside William, and Cody rode ahead as point, and behind them, in a wagon driven by Jesse, sat Orson Weller, with the original letter wrapped in oilcloth in his breast pocket. They arrived at mid-morning. Alderman was already there. Howe was standing outside the courthouse with 3 men in suits, and 2 in the kind of clothes that said hired rather than employed. And he watched their party ride in with the particular expression of a man who has set a trap and is watching the footsteps approach it. Abigail met his eyes from the saddle and held them. She did not look away first. He did. It was small. It was probably meaningless in the larger calculation. But she felt it like a bell struck clean. William swung down from his horse and came to her side as she dismounted, and the 2 of them walked toward the courthouse together, and she was aware of how it looked. The big rancher and the heavy girl side by side, walking like they had every right to be there because they did. And she thought, "Look at us, Daddy. Look at us go." The courthouse doors opened ahead of them. Inside, the judge was already waiting. And for the first time in 4 months, Abigail Carter walked into a room knowing that the truth she carried was about to see daylight. And there was not a single thing Royce Alderman could do to put it back in the dark. The courtroom in Harlan was the kind of room that had heard a great many things and remembered all of them. Judge Elias Horn was 64 years old and had been on the bench in this county for 19 of them, and he had the face of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by what people did to each other over land and money. He had white hair, a short white beard, and eyes the color of old bark that moved slowly and missed nothing. He looked at Alderman's lawyers first, then at William's lawyer, a younger man named Garrett Cole, who had ridden through the night from the county seat after William's message reached him. Then at the gathered parties, Alderman and his men on one side of the room, William and Abigail and Cody and Orson on the other, with Jesse standing at the back, because there wasn't enough bench space for everyone. Then Judge Horn looked directly at Abigail. She didn't know why. She hadn't spoken yet. But he looked at her with those bark-colored eyes as if he'd already been told something about her, and was in the process of deciding whether it was accurate. She held the look. He moved on. "I've read the filings," he said. His voice was dry and unhurried, the voice of a man who'd learned long ago that rushing things in this room never helped. Mr. Alderman's counsel submitted a boundary claim, a survey, and a counter-allegation of trespass and property interference against one Miss Abigail Carter, employee of Hawthorne Ranch. He set the papers down. "Mr. Cole, I understand you have documentation that challenges the original survey." Garrett Cole stood. "We do, Your Honor. We have the original county survey from 1867, a letter from the late bank officer Gerald Frost, documenting that the boundary was deliberately altered at Alderman's direction, and a witness prepared to testify to the pattern of fraudulent land acquisition that this survey is part of." The room shifted. Alderman's lead lawyer, a tall man named Beaumont, with a voice like a closing door, was on his feet before Cole had finished. "Your Honor, the so-called letter is an unsigned document of questionable provenance, and the proposed witness is a known associate of—" "Sit down, Mr. Beaumont," Judge Horn said. Not loudly. Beaumont sat. "The letter," Horn said, "is signed. I can see the signature from here. Gerald Frost, dated March 14, 1879. Mrs. Frost, who is present by affidavit, confirms the handwriting as her late husband's." He looked at Beaumont. "That's not unsigned. Try again." Beaumont tried several more things. None of them worked. Orson Weller took the witness chair with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who understood this was the most important thing he'd ever do in a courtroom, and possibly anywhere. He was nervous. Abigail could see it in the set of his hands. But when he started speaking, his voice steadied, And what came out was 20 years of accumulated knowledge delivered plainly and in order. He named dates. He named properties. He named Gerald Frost and the conversation in which Frost had shown him the letter, and wept. Actually wept, Orson said. And the courtroom was very quiet, and said he didn't know how to undo what he'd done, but couldn't die without telling someone. He named Pickett the Denver surveyor. He named 2 other men aldermen had used as intermediaries. He described the mechanism, in careful detail, how aldermen's people would identify a property engineer, financial pressure through manipulated loan terms, and then move in with a fraudulent survey to claim the land once the owner couldn't fight back. And then Beaumont stood to cross-examine him, and Abigail gripped her hands together in her lap. "Mr. Weller," Beaumont said, "you've described yourself as a co-signer of the Carter loan." "Yes." "Meaning you had a financial interest in the outcome." "I had a legal obligation," Orson said, "which I failed to honor because I was afraid. That's what I'm here to correct. You're here because you've been promised immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. I'm here because I watched a good man's daughter lose everything she had, and I could have prevented it," Orson said. His voice cracked once and then steadied. "The immunity was Mr. Cole's idea. The testimony is mine." Beaumont pushed harder. He implied Orson was lying, that the letter was fabricated, that this entire proceeding was a coordinated attempt by William Hawthorne to neutralize a legitimate legal competitor. Orson held. Every question he held. And when Beaumont finally sat down, there was a silence in the room that had a particular quality. The silence of a story that has just become real enough to be undeniable. Judge Horn looked at his papers. "I'm going to take a recess," he said. 30 minutes. They stood outside in the morning air, and nobody talked much. Cody stood to one side, arms folded, watching the door of the courthouse with the focus of a man who had decided an outcome and was waiting for reality to agree with him. Jesse had brought water from somewhere and passed it around without being asked. Orson sat on a bench with his eyes closed and his hands very still, finally on his knees. William stood beside Abigail. They weren't talking. They were just standing, which had become its own language between them over the past weeks, the ability to be in a space together without needing to fill it with sound. "He's going to rule for the injunction," she said quietly. "Probably," William said. "Beaumont knows it too. That's why he pushed so hard on Orson." "Didn't work." "No." She looked in the courthouse door. "When the inquiry opens, the broader one, into all the other properties, it's going to be long. Years, maybe." "Yes. My father's land might not come back in time for it to matter to anyone living." William was quiet for a moment. Then, "The truth about how he lost it will come back. His name will be clear. That matters." She pressed her lips together. "It does," she said. "It's not everything, but it does." "Carter." His voice was low. "Whatever happens in the next 30 minutes, and whatever happens in the next 2 years of proceedings, you did this. You walked into that ranch 3 weeks ago with 1 trunk and 1 horse, and you did all of this." She looked at him. "We did it," she said. "I provided the ranch," he said. "You provided everything that actually mattered." She didn't have a response to that. She looked away at the street, at the ordinary morning business of a county seat town going about its life, unaware that something significant was happening in the courthouse behind her. She thought about her father saying, "Make yourself necessary, Abby." Not indispensable. Necessary. She thought she understood now that the difference between those two things was love. Indispensable meant people couldn't function without you. Necessary meant you were part of how the world was supposed to work. She was starting to feel for the first time in a long time like she was in the right place. Judge Horn granted the injunction. He did it in 9 sentences, each one precise and final, and the last sentence contained the words, "Fraudulent survey pattern of deliberate misrepresentation and further inquiry warranted." And when he said those words, Royce Alderman made a sound barely audible, quickly suppressed. That was the sound of a man watching 15 years of careful construction begin to crack at the base. Beaumont moved to appeal immediately. "You may do so," Judge Horn said. "The injunction stands during the appeals process. The survey is suspended. The fence work stops today." He looked at Alderman directly for the first time. "Mr. Alderman, I am also referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for review of the allegations Mr. Weller has described. That process will proceed independent of any appeal you file." He gathered his papers. "We're adjourned." The gavel came down. In the quiet that followed, Royce Alderman looked across the room at Abigail Carter. She looked back. There was no triumph in it. She was too tired for triumph. Too wrung out from 3 weeks of hard work and hard thinking, and the specific kind of emotional labor that didn't have a name but cost more than any physical exertion she'd ever done. What she felt was simpler than triumph. Cleaner. She felt like the truth had been told. Finally, after all this time in a room that was required to listen. Alderman looked away first. Again. William put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the same gesture as in Mrs. Frost's bedroom there, and gone the weight of it precise and intentional. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride out had been. Jesse was talking enough for everyone, which was a mercy. Processing the whole morning with the enthusiastic relief of a young man who'd been tightly wound for days and could finally loosen. Cody let him talk, which was unusual enough that Abigail noticed it and thought Cody was probably more moved by the morning than he'd ever admit. Orson rode separately, a little behind the group, and she let him. They weren't finished. She didn't know what finished would look like between them, and she wasn't certain she'd ever get all the way to forgiveness in any uncomplicated sense. But she understood something she hadn't understood before this morning, watching him in that chair holding steady under Beaumont's pressure. Orson Weller was not a bad man who had done bad things. He was a weak man who had done a terrible thing and had spent 4 years being destroyed by it. That didn't make it all right, but it made it human. She didn't know what to do with that yet. She put it somewhere she could come back to later and kept riding. William rode beside her for miles without speaking and then said, "What are you going to do after?" She looked at him. "After what?" "After all of this settles," he said. "The inquiry opens, the legal work goes to the lawyers, which it will once the prosecutor's office gets involved. After the immediate crisis is handled." He kept his eyes on the road. "What do you want?" The question was so simple and so unusual that it took her a moment to process it. People didn't often ask Abigail Carter what she wanted. They told her what she was, what she wasn't, what she could and couldn't have, what she should and shouldn't expect. They did not generally ask her what she wanted. "I want my father's name cleared," she said. "Formally, on record." "The inquiry will accomplish that." "Then I want to work," she said. "Real work, the kind I'm actually trained for. Not kitchen work, not charity. Land assessment, water rights, freight routing. There are ranches in this territory that are losing money because they don't understand their own land, and I know how to fix that." She paused. "I want to be paid fairly for it and treated like I know what I'm doing." "You could do that from Hawthorne Ranch," he said carefully. "As a permanent position, properly compensated." She looked at him. "Is that what you want?" she said. "Or what you think I need?" He met her eyes. "It's what I want," he said, "and what I think the ranch needs, and what I think you'd be good at." A pause. "I'm trying very hard to be clear about those 3 things being separate." "I know you are," she said. "Is it working?" She thought about it honestly. "Mostly," she said. His mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. "I'll take mostly," he said. They arrived back at the ranch in the late afternoon to find the whole place had heard. She didn't know how in the way news moved in territories with few enough people and tight enough connections that information traveled faster than horses on certain days. By the time they rode through the gate, Mrs. Arden was on the porch with an expression that was for the first time entirely open, and Roy and Dale Sims were coming in from the south pasture at a pace that meant they'd been watching the road. "Injunction," Roy called out. "Granted," William said. Roy said something extremely unprofessional and extremely satisfied. Mrs. Arden came down the porch steps and stopped in front of Abigail as she dismounted. She was a contained woman. Abigail had come to understand this about her, that her containment was not coldness, but was itself a kind of discipline, and what she did next was not contained at all. She took both of Abigail's hands in hers. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Arden said. "I've owed it to you since the first week. I judged you on things that didn't matter and ignored the things that did, and that was wrong." Abigail looked at the older woman's hands holding hers and thought about how few people had touched her kindly in the past 4 months. How rarely anyone reached out. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "You're part of this ranch," Mrs. Arden said. "Whatever you decide going forward, I want you to know that." She released Abigail's hands and went back to the house. Pete Calloway was at the edge of the yard. He caught her eye and nodded once. Not elaborate, not overdone exactly the right amount, and went back to his work. And Jesse, who had apparently been saving it up for the right moment, let out the whoop. He'd been suppressing since they left the courthouse, and it was so loud and so genuine that Clover startled sideways, and Cody told him sharply to settle down. And then Cody's mouth twitched, and he turned away before it became something he couldn't take back. That evening, William told her about his past. Not all of it. He wasn't a man who gave everything at once. She understood that now had understood it for a while. But he told her the part she needed to know. They were on the porch after supper, the ranch gone quiet around them, and he started talking in the way people started talking sometimes in the evening after a long day. Not because they'd decided to, but because the day had spent them down past the point where they kept careful control of what they let out. "Her name was Clara," he said. "I told you she left because this life was too hard. That's true. But what I didn't tell you, what I haven't told anyone, is that she left because I didn't ask her to stay." Abigail was very still. "I knew she was unhappy," he said. "I saw it. I watched it happen over 2 years, and I thought if I just worked harder, built the ranch bigger, made the life more comfortable, she'd come around. That if I made the situation better, she'd choose differently." He looked at his hands. "I never asked her what she needed. I never asked her if there was something I could do. I just kept working and assumed that she'd tell me when it got too bad." His jaw tightened. "She didn't tell me. She just went." "How long ago?" Abigail said. 7 years. "And you've been here since? Alone?" I've been here since. I told myself it was enough." He paused. "It's a good life. The ranch is real. The work matters. I told myself a man could build a whole life on those things." "He can," she said. "He can," William agreed. "But it gets quiet." He looked at her. "You know what I noticed the first week you were here? The ranch got less quiet. Not because you talk constantly, you don't. But because you're present in a way that changes the weight of a place." He stopped. "I don't know how to say that without it sounding like something I don't mean it to be." "Say it the way you mean it," she said. He looked at her directly. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "Not as an employee I'd have to replace. I don't want you to leave because this ranch is better with you here and I'm—" He stopped again. "I'm better. Since you came, I think more clearly. I notice things I'd stopped noticing." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what to do with that, to be honest. I haven't known what to do with it for about 2 weeks." She looked at him. She thought about every reason this was complicated. Her situation, the power that still existed between an employer and someone who'd been borderline desperate when she arrived. The fact that she hadn't planned any of this. The fact that she was still in some fundamental way in the middle of the hardest period of her life. She thought about her father saying the land always tells you the truth. You just have to be willing to put your hands on it and listen. She put her hands on the truth. "I don't want to leave either," she said. "And I'm telling you that as someone who is very clear about what she does and doesn't need from any situation. I'm not saying it because I'm grateful. I'm not saying it because I don't have other options." She met his eyes. "I'm saying it because it's true." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. The evening settled around them, and they sat with it. 3 days later, the second shoe dropped, and it was louder than anyone expected. The county prosecutor's office had moved faster than even Garrett Cole had predicted, and by Thursday morning, Royce Alderman had been summoned for a formal interview regarding the allegations in Orson Weller's testimony. What nobody expected was that Alderman would show up to that interview with a second lawyer, a revised account of his relationship with Gerald Frost, and a name. The name was not one Abigail recognized. But William went very still when Garrett Cole rode out to the ranch to deliver the news in person, and still in William Hawthorne meant something. "Who is he?" Abigail said. Cole looked at William. William nodded. "A man named Thomas Breck," Cole said. "He's a land agent out of Denver. Alderman is claiming Breck was the architect of the survey fraud, that Alderman himself was misled about the legitimacy of the boundary documentation." Cole's voice was carefully neutral. "He's saying he was a victim of Breck's operation, same as the ranchers." The silence was thorough. "He's throwing someone else under the wagon," Cody said from the doorway. "He's doing more than that," William said. His voice was very quiet. "Thomas Breck is one of the largest land agents in the state. He has connections to the railroad, to 3 Denver banks, and to the territorial governor's office." He paused. "If Alderman can make this about Breck, it becomes something much larger than a local fraud case. It becomes political." Another pause. "And political cases move very slowly." Abigail absorbed that. "He's trying to complicate it," she said. "Make it so large and so connected that the smaller cases my father's land, the other families get lost in the machinery." "Yes," Cole said. "Is Breck real?" William said. "Is there actually a connection?" "We don't know yet," Cole said. "There might be. Alderman's smart enough not to name someone completely fictitious. If Breck has dirty hands, this becomes very complicated. If he doesn't, Alderman's bluff gets called and his position gets worse." He looked at Abigail. "But it buys him time either way." She thought hard. "The other 2 families," she said. "The ones who said they'd come forward. Do they have documentation that connects directly to Alderman, not through Breck?" "One of them does," Cole said slowly. "The Harmon family. Their survey manipulation was documented in Frost's records as well. Alderman by name, no intermediary." "Then the Harmon case doesn't go away regardless of what Breck is or isn't," she said. "It stays direct, and direct cases don't get swallowed by political complications." She looked at Cole. "Can you contact the Harmons today?" Cole looked at William. "She's right," William said. "I'll ride this afternoon," Cole said. Chepe. The week that followed was the strangest of Abigail's life, which was saying something. The ranch ran. The cattle were managed. The water flowed in the east pasture. The south fence, its posts no longer being removed under the protection of the now suspended survey, was repaired by Roy and Dale Sims in a single afternoon with the focused satisfaction of men reclaiming something that was theirs. And in parallel to all of it, a legal machinery ground forward that Abigail was part of, but couldn't control the most uncomfortable position she'd ever occupied. She handled it the way she handled the things she couldn't control. She did everything within her reach as well as she possibly could, and tried not to spend energy on the rest. She mapped the entire water system of the East Range. It was something she'd been meaning to do since week 1 and hadn't had time for until now. She spent 3 days on it. Clover picking careful paths along creek beds and ridgelines. Abigail making notes and sketches that would let any future person understand this land without having to learn it from scratch the way she had. William found her on the 3rd evening of this project, coming back to the barn with mud on her boots and a sheaf of papers under her arm. "You're surveying the East Range," he said. It wasn't a question. "Someone should," she said. "You need a complete record. Not just the water, the grazing quality, the fence condition, the access points. Right now it exists mostly in Cody's head, and that's a risk." He looked at the papers. "May I?" he said. She handed them over. He studied them for longer than she expected. She watched his face move through the information, recognizing things, finding things she'd noted that he apparently hadn't known or had forgotten, pausing at 2 points, with the look of a man recalibrating something. "This section here," he said, pointing. "You've noted the soil condition as poor along the north edge of the east pasture." "It is poor," she said. "But it's not naturally poor. Something's been leaching out of it. I think there's a mineral deposit upstream that the creek's been carrying down since the flow was redirected. Now that the water's corrected, it should start improving, but it'll take a season, maybe 2. That's why the grass has been thin there for 3 years, he said slowly. I thought it was just the drought. Partly the drought, she said. Mostly the water. He looked at the papers again. Then he looked at her. Abigail, he said. She looked up. He'd never used her first name before. 3 weeks and not once, always Carter or Miss Carter. And now it sat in the evening air between them, like something new had just been placed there. She waited. I owe you more than a fair wage, he said. What you've brought to this ranch, what you've done for it, and for me, I don't know what the right word is for that kind of contribution. I don't think it's money. It's not nothing, she said practically. He almost laughed. No, it's not nothing. You'll be compensated completely fairly. You have my word on that. He held her gaze. I mean something else. I mean, I want you to know that I see it. All of it. I want to make sure you know that. She thought about all the years of being unseen. The men who'd looked through her like glass. The women who'd pitied her. The town that had written her off as something sad and ungainly and permanently marginal. She thought about 4 months of grinding survival. After her father died, going to sleep every night with the weight of a loss. She couldn't grieve properly because she was too busy trying not to drown. I know, she said. Her voice was steady. I know you see it. Good, he said quietly. She took her papers back and went inside. Her chest was doing the thing again. The thing she'd been managing for 2 weeks with diminishing success. The particular dangerous warmth of being cared for by someone who had earned her respect first, which was the only kind that ever stuck. She sat at her table and looked at her survey notes and thought, careful Abby. Careful. And then Daddy always said careful and necessary aren't the same thing. The Harmon case moved faster than anyone expected. Ellen Harmon was 62 years old and had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity for 4 years, which meant she arrived at Cole's office with a box of documentation so organized and thorough that Cole spent an afternoon going through it and came out looking slightly odd. The Harmon survey fraud was clean. Direct. Alderman's name on every relevant document. No intermediary, no Breck, no political fog. Just Royce Alderman telling a surveyor named Pickett exactly where to draw a line that wasn't where the law said it should be. Pickett, when approached by the prosecutor's office with this documentation and the promise of reduced charges, made a decision that took approximately 4 minutes. He named Alderman. He named the specific conversations. He named the dates. He named 3 other surveys he'd falsified at Alderman's direction, including the one on Hawthorne's south boundary. And he named the Carter property, in writing, under oath, with the specific date of the alteration and the sum Alderman had paid him to do it. Cole rode out to the ranch with this news on a Thursday morning, and when he finished laying it out, the room was very quiet. Then Abigail said, Is it enough? For criminal charges against Alderman, Cole said. Yes, I believe so. For the properties, she said, the Harmons, the other families, my father's land, Cole was careful. The civil process is separate and slower. Criminal conviction doesn't automatically restore property, but it creates a legal foundation that makes the civil claims much stronger. He paused. For the Carter property, specifically, you'd need to bring a separate action against whoever currently holds the deed. That's the bank technically, since they foreclosed. If we can prove the foreclosure was based on fraud... He stopped. It's possible. I won't promise more than possible. Possible is better than nothing, she said. Considerably. Cole agreed. She looked at William. He was watching her with the expression she'd stopped trying to categorize and had started simply accepting the expression that was most itself at moments when she said something that was truer than the situation required. It's a start, she said. It's more than a start, he said. She shook her head. Don't let me think it's more than it is. It's a start. My father's land is a long road from here. She squared her shoulders. But it's a start. Royce Alderman was arrested on a Friday. She heard about it from Jesse, who'd ridden to town for supplies and come back at twice his normal pace, hat nearly off his head from the speed. They took him this morning, Jesse said, barely out of the saddle. Sheriff rode out to Alderman's place with 2 deputies, Brought him in on charges fraud, conspiracy, property theft by deception. He was breathing hard. Town's talking about nothing else. She received this information standing in the yard. She thought she'd feel something large. Relief or triumph or some kind of completion. Instead, she felt something much quieter, the deep settling exhale of a weight put down. Not victory. More like truth finally arriving at the address where it was supposed to be. "Is he in county lockup?" she said. "Yes, ma'am. His lawyers were there inside an hour." Jessie paused. "He made bail, but the charges stand." "They'll stand," she said. "The documentation is solid." Jessie looked at her. "You okay?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm getting there," she said. What she didn't expect was Sutter's Creek. The town had always been the specific texture of a place that had made up its mind about you before you walked in, and small towns were slow to revise. She'd been braced for that. She'd been telling herself for weeks that what the county court decided and what the town of Sutter's Creek thought were two separate things, and that she had made her peace with probably never being fully accepted in the place where she'd been most dismissed. She wasn't prepared for Chester Pruitt. He came to the ranch on Saturday morning, rode out himself, 62 years old, bad hip, the man who had rocked back in his chair and let Tom Greer laugh at her and done nothing. He tied his horse at the gate and walked up to the porch where she happened to be sitting with her survey notes, and he took his hat off. "Miss Carter," he said. "Chester," she said. He turned his hat in his hands. He was clearly working up to something and struggling with the shape of it. "I've been talking to some of the men in town," he said finally. "About the bridge. About what you tried to tell us that morning." He stopped. "And about what happened with your father's land." She waited. "We didn't treat you right," he said. "Not that morning, and not before neither. Not in all the years you were in this county before you lost your father." He met her eyes briefly and then looked at his hat. "I can't fix that. I know I can't. But I wanted you to know that I know it." She looked at him for a long moment. I was not a bad man. He had never been a bad man, just a complacent one. The specific kind of person who went along with cruelty, that he wasn't perpetrating himself, which was its own kind of failure. She'd known that about him even then. It hadn't made it hurt less, but it meant something different than if he'd been vicious. "Thank you for coming," she said. He nodded. He put his hat back on. "The town's talking about the inquiry," he said. "About Alderman and the other families. There's a feeling about it." He paused. "People are angry. At what was done. At themselves, some of them, for not looking harder." "I hope they'll say so when the civil cases go forward," she said. "Testimony about character and community reputation matters in civil proceedings." He blinked. Then he almost smiled. "You want us to testify." "Not for me personally," she said. "For the families, for the Harmons, for everyone else who lost something they shouldn't have." She looked at him steadily. "You can't get my father's years back, but you can help get his name back. That matters." Chester Pruitt left 20 minutes later with, she suspected, a clearer sense of purpose than he'd arrived with. Tom Greer came 2 hours after that, which she hadn't expected, and which cost her considerably more equanimity to get through, but she managed it. William watched both conversations from a distance he'd chosen deliberately, and afterward he said nothing about them, which was exactly the right thing to do. 2 weeks after the arrest, the town of Sutter's Creek held a meeting about the inquiry, and Abigail was asked to attend. She almost said no. She talked herself into it over the course of an evening, working through the reasons to go and the reasons not to, in the same methodical way she worked through any terrain assessment. She knew what it would cost, standing in front of all those people, being the focus of it being looked at. She had never wanted to be a symbol. She'd just wanted to work. William, when she told him about the invitation, said nothing for a moment. Then, "Do you want to go?" "I want the outcome," she said. "I'm less certain about the process." "That's fair," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." She thought about the other families, the Harmons, the girl she'd gone to school with at 14. All the people who had lost things and hadn't had the specific combination of circumstances and location and stubbornness that had put Abigail Carter in Hawthorne Ranch at the right moment. I'll go. I'll come with you, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to, she said. I know, he said. Exactly what she'd said to him. A small, deliberate echo. She understood then that this was what it looked like, William Hawthorne deciding something. Not with declarations, not with drama. Just with the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who had made up his mind and didn't feel the need to argue about it. All right, she said. They went to the meeting. She stood in front of the people of Sutter's Creek and spoke plainly about what she'd found, what aldermen had done, and what the families who'd been harmed needed now. She spoke about her father. She spoke about the boundary survey and Frost's letter and Pickett's testimony. She spoke for 12 minutes, and she did not waver once. When she was done, Chester Pruitt started clapping. Then other people did. It wasn't the whole room at once. It built slowly, unevenly, the way real things built, rather than the theatrical uniformity of a performance. But it built, and by the end, it was the whole room, and she stood there and felt it and thought, Daddy, they're clapping. They're finally listening. She thought she heard him say, I know Abby. I've been watching. She didn't cry, but it was the closest she'd come in a long time. She looked across the room and found William standing at the back, and he was watching her with that expression. The full open one she'd seen only twice before, the one that wasn't armored or measured, just entirely there, and she thought, oh, that's what that is. She'd known for a while. She'd just been too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. She walked toward him when the meeting ended, and he walked toward her, and they met in the middle of the room, because that she thought was how it was supposed to work. Not one person walking to the other, but both of them moving. You did well, he said. We did well, she said. All of us. His mouth did the thing. The real smile held back, but barely. Come on, he said. Let's go home. And this time, when he said home, they both knew it meant the same place. The ride home from Sutter's Creek that night was different from every ride before it. Not in any way she could have pointed to. Directly the road was the same road, the horses moved at the same pace. The sky held the same stars it always did over this territory. But something had shifted in the air between them, the way air shifted before a weather change, and they both felt it, and neither of them spoke about it for the first 10 miles. Jesse and Cody rode ahead at a distance that suggested they understood, without being told that this particular stretch of road belonged to the two people behind them. Finally, William said, You should know something. She looked at him. I've been talking to Garrett Cole about the Carter property, he said. Not the criminal case, the civil claim on the land itself. She went still in the saddle. I told you I was, she said carefully. Months ago. I know, but I've been doing more than talking. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. There's a mechanism. It's not simple, and it's not fast. But if the bank's foreclosure can be proven fraudulent, which Pickett's testimony supports, the deed reverts to the estate. Your father's estate. He paused. Which you are the sole heir of. She was quiet for a long time. How long? She said. Cole says 2 years if it goes smoothly, 3 if it doesn't. He glanced at her. It won't be a fast road, Abigail. She absorbed that. 2 years. 3 years. She'd spent 4 months surviving on kitchen scraps and narrow beds, and the bone-deep loneliness of someone who has lost everything and cannot yet see the shape of what comes next. 2 years felt like a long time. It also felt for the first time like a distance she could see the other side of. That land was my father's life's work, she said quietly. He built it from nothing. 30 years of work in that ground. I know, William said. If it comes back. She stopped. When it comes back. When it comes back, he agreed. She straightened in the saddle. Then it comes back with his name on it, cleared, on the county record, not just in people's memory. Cole's already working on that, William said. Separate filing, a formal correction of the public record. It'll be done before the civil case resolves, probably within 6 months. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road, but she could see his profile, the set of his jaw, the line of his shoulders, the way he held himself when he'd done something he thought was right and wasn't looking for acknowledgement. You've been working on this for weeks, she said. Without telling me. I didn't want to tell you until I knew it was real, he said. You've had enough people tell you things that turned out not to be real." She didn't have an answer for that. She faced forward and rode and felt something expanding in her chest. Not the careful, managed warmth she'd been rationing for weeks, but something fuller than that. Something that was going to require her to make some decisions about what she was willing to feel. She wasn't ready for that conversation tonight, but she was getting there. 3 days later, the thing she hadn't been ready for arrived anyway, because life in this territory had never once waited for her to be ready. It came in the form of a letter. Mrs. Arden brought it to her at the barn where she was working with the sorrel gelding, who was fully settled. Now the nighttime fear gone from his body, moving easy and willing, and the return address on the envelope was a law office in Denver that she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the nearest bale and read it a third time, because the third time was when her brain finally agreed to process what her eyes were seeing. The letter was from an attorney representing a consortium of landowners in 3 counties who had collectively spent the better part of a year trying to build a legal case against Royce Alderman and the surveyor Pickett. They had heard through channels she could only imagine about the Frost letter and Pickett's testimony, and Abigail Carter's role in bringing both to light. They were writing to ask if she would be willing to serve as a land assessment consultant for their consolidated civil case, to apply her knowledge of water rights terrain and survey documentation to the analysis of multiple affected properties. They named a figure for her compensation. She read that figure 3 times too. It was not a charity amount. It was not a sympathy amount. It was the kind of number that people paid when they needed something done correctly by someone who knew how to do it. She sat on the bale for a long time. Then she went to find William. Howe was in the study, which was where he was most mornings now, when he wasn't in the field going through the ranch accounts, with the focused attention of a man who understood that a ranch was a living financial organism that required constant tending. He looked up when she came in, read her face in whatever way he'd learned to read it, and put down his pen. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. He read it carefully, the way he always did, and she watched his face move through the information. When he finished, he set it down on the desk and looked at her. "This is what you wanted," he said. "Real work, compensated fairly. What you told me you wanted on the ride back from Harlan." "Yes," she said. And she sat in the chair across from his desk. She'd sat in this chair a dozen times now the first time she'd been invited, and after that she'd started sitting without being asked, which was a change she'd made, so gradually she'd almost missed it. "It's out of the county," she said. "Multiple properties in 3 counties. I'd be traveling, weeks at a time probably." He was quiet. "The position here," she said. "The work I've been doing on the ranch." "Cody can manage the water assessments," William said. His voice was carefully even. "You've taught him enough, and I can hire someone for the freight routing." He paused. "The ranch will function." She looked at him. "That's not what I was asking," she said. He met her eyes. "I know," he said. The silence was the longest they'd had since she'd arrived. "I don't want you to go," he said. It was simple and complete and entirely without performance. "I want to be clear that I'm saying that as something true, not as something intended to influence your decision. You've earned this. Every word of that letter you've earned." His jaw worked. "I just want you to know the truth of where I stand." She looked at the letter on the desk. She thought about her father and what he'd taught her about land, that you had to walk it fully before you could know it. That the shape of a place only revealed itself to people willing to put in the time. She'd been walking this ranch for weeks. She'd been walking something else too, something less measurable, but no less real, and she was starting to understand its shape. "I'm going to write back," she said. William was very still. "I'm going to tell them yes," she said. "And I'm going to tell them the engagement will begin in 3 months, because I have current commitments that require 3 months to complete properly." She looked at him. "And when the engagement is done, which Cole estimates at 6 to 8 months of active work, I intend to come back." He looked at her. "To the ranch," she said. "If the position." "Abigail," he said. She stopped. "You can always come back," he said. "That is not conditional on anything. The position, the room, the work, it's yours as long as you want it. He paused. But that's not the only thing I'm offering, and I think you know that. She did know that. She'd known it for longer than was probably reasonable. I know, she said. Then I'd like you to know it plainly, he said. Not by implication. I'd like to say it clearly so there's no confusion. All right, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. I love you, he said. Simple as the truth always was when people finally got around to saying it. I've known it for about 3 weeks, and I've been trying to find the right moment, which doesn't exist, so I'm saying it now. She looked at him across the desk, with the letter between them, and the whole ranch going about its business outside, and the East Creek running the way it was supposed to run, and the South Fence whole and sound. And she thought about all the places, and all the people, and all the long, hard months that had led her to this particular room with this particular man. I love you too, she said. I've known it for about 2.5 weeks, and I've been telling myself it wasn't practical. Is it practical now? He said. No, she said. But some things are necessary whether they're practical or not. My father always said so. He almost smiled. The real one. He was a smart man, William said. The smartest I ever knew, she said. Until recently. She wrote the letter to Denver that afternoon. 3 months. She told them 3 months, and she told them why not. The personal reasons, those were hers, but the professional ones which were real and sufficient. She had a water system assessment to complete on the East Range. She had survey documentation to finish for the ranch's own legal records. She had knowledge she'd accumulated that needed to be transferred properly before she left, so that the ranch didn't lose it when she was gone. All of that was true. It was also true that she needed 3 months because she and William Hawthorne were 2 careful, private, thoroughly self-contained people who had arrived at something real and significant, and real and significant things needed time to become what they were actually going to be before you could carry them out into a wider world and still have them hold. She understood that about herself. She was glad for the first time that she'd always been a person who paid careful attention. The first test of all of it came sooner than she'd expected. It arrived in the form of Garrett Cole riding out to the ranch 12 days after the town meeting with news that Royce Alderman's lawyers had filed a countersuit, not against William, not against the Harmons, but against Abigail Carter personally. The suit claimed that her actions in dismantling the modified dam on the East Creek had constituted deliberate destruction of water infrastructure belonging to Alderman, and was seeking damages substantial enough that the number when Cole read it made Jesse, who happened to be in the room, say something that Mrs. Arden would not have approved of. Abigail read the filing. She set it on the table. She picked it up and read it again. He's trying to bury me in legal costs, she said. Even if he loses, and he'll lose because Pickett already testified the dam modification was done on Alderman's orders, even if he loses, the process costs money I don't have. He's also trying to scare you, Cole said. Pull you back from the Denver engagement. Make you too occupied with defending yourself to be useful to the consortium. He knows about the Denver letter, William said. His voice was very quiet. His lawyers are thorough, Cole said. The room was silent. Abigail thought hard. Can the countersuit be consolidated with the existing criminal proceedings? She said. Possibly, Cole said slowly. If we can argue that the civil suit is retaliatory, filed specifically to obstruct testimony and participation in the criminal case, a judge might agree to consolidate and potentially dismiss. Is that a real argument? It's a real argument, Cole said. It's not guaranteed. How long to file for consolidation? I can have it ready in 2 days. Do it, William said. I'll cover Cole's fees, Abigail said at the same moment. William looked at her. You will not, he said. These are my legal fees, she said. For a suit against me personally. The suit exists because of your work on this ranch, he said. Which means the ranch, William. She used his name deliberately, which she'd been doing for 12 days now, and she still felt him register it every time. I understand what you're trying to do. I appreciate it. But if I let you carry my legal battles, I am exactly what people have been saying about me, a woman depending on a man's money because she has no other options. She held his gaze. I have options. I have a Denver engagement that will pay enough to cover Cole's fees twice over. I will manage my own legal situation. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. Thank you, she said. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met, he said. But the way he said it wasn't complaint. It was something closer to reverence. I prefer thorough, she said. Cole filed for consolidation on Thursday. The judge, a different judge based in Denver assigned to the criminal case, reviewed the filing on Friday and issued a preliminary ruling on Monday that was 3 pages long and contained the phrase, apparent bad faith, legal conduct, in its second paragraph, which Cole said was about as clearly as a federal judge ever said what he actually thought. The countersuit was not dismissed yet, but it was flagged. It was visible. And Alderman's lawyers reading that preliminary ruling made a strategic decision to withdraw the personal suit against Abigail Carter, rather than risk further inflaming a judge who was already paying close attention. Cole sent a rider with the news. Abigail received it in the barn predictably, where she seemed to receive most of the important news in her life, which she decided said something about the nature of barns as places where things became clear. She sat with it for 5 minutes. Then she went and found William in the east pasture where he was working with Cody on the fence line assessment she'd suggested 2 weeks ago. He saw her coming and the expression on her face and said something brief to Cody, who immediately found somewhere else to be. Well, he said. They withdrew, she said. He breathed out. Good, he said. Yes, she said. They stood in the east pasture with the creek running behind them, and the fence posts solid in the ground, and the grass already coming back greener on the north edge, where the mineral leaching was correcting itself. And she thought, look at this place. Look at what this land can do when someone finally takes care of it properly. I want to show you something, she said. Now, she said, before I lose my nerve. He followed her without question, which was one of the things she'd come to rely on, the way William Hawthorne simply moved with her when she was going somewhere without needing to know the destination first. She led him to a section of the East Range she'd been documenting for the past week, a stretch of ground near the Upper Creek bend that she'd noticed on her second day, and kept coming back to that she'd been saving in her mind like something she wasn't ready to share yet. She stopped. Look at this ground, she said. He looked. I see grass, he said. Good grass, thick. Look at the color, she said. And the moisture level at the edge here, and the way the slope runs. He looked again, more carefully. This is... He stopped. This is the best grazing ground on the property. Yes, she said. I've never... He turned to look at her. In 17 years, I've never paid particular attention to this section. I always routed the cattle further south. Because the south route was the established route, she said. And the established route made sense when the water was different. Now that the creek's running correctly, this section is accessible in a way it wasn't before. She looked at the ground. If you rotate cattle through here even seasonally, even just in the dry months when the south pasture gets thin, you'll carry more animals through winter without supplemental feed. Maybe 30 head more, maybe 40. Howe was quiet for a long time. 30 or 40 head, he said. At current prices. I know what it's worth, she said. I'm not telling you for the money. I'm telling you because this land has been waiting for someone to notice it. She looked at him. It just needed the water to run right first. He looked at her. Abigail, he said. Hawthorne, she said. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to hear it as a real question, not a pressure. She nodded. When you come back from Denver, he said, however long it takes, when all the legal work is done, and your father's name is on the record the way it should be, and you've done the work you want to do and built the reputation you're already building. He stopped. When you come back to this ranch, I'd like it to be permanent. I'd like to ask you to stay, not as an employee. He paused. You understand what I'm asking? She looked at him. The east pasture went on around them. The creek ran. Somewhere behind them she could hear the cattle moving in the south range, and Jesse's voice carrying on the wind, and the ordinary living sounds of a place that was genuinely, thoroughly, completely her home. I understand, she said. And, he said. And I'm not going to answer yet, she said. He waited. Not because the answer is no, she said. Because the answer is yes, and I want it to mean something real when I say it. I want to say it when I'm standing on my own ground, not just emotionally, but legally. When my father's land is on record in my name, and I've done the Denver work, and I've come back to you because I chose to come back, not because I was here already, and it was easy. She held his gaze. Can you wait for that? He was quiet for a moment. I've been waiting for the right thing for 7 years, he said. I think I can manage a few more months. She smiled. Not the careful, managed kind. The real one. The one she didn't give out casually. The one that her father used to say was the best thing about her face. Good, she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. Held it standing beside her in the east pasture in the late afternoon light, with everything that had happened between them and everything that was still coming. She held his hand back, and that was enough for now. The 3 months passed. The way time passed when you were doing real work quickly enough that you looked up sometimes surprised by where the calendar had gotten to, and fully enough that each day felt like it had been worth the living. She finished the East Range survey. She documented the water system, completely drew maps that Cody could read and that would outlast both of them. She worked with Jesse until he could assess cattle health with his eyes from 50 yards, and the boy was a better horseman at 19 for the attention she'd given him than most men twice his age. She transferred what she knew with the same thoroughness her father had transferred it to her, not because she was leaving forever, but because knowledge hoarded was knowledge wasted, and that was something Daniel Carter had put in her early enough that it was bone now. Pete Calloway left the ranch 6 weeks before her departure date. Not dramatically, he gave proper notice, said he'd taken a position in Wyoming. Shook William's hand, and on his way out passed Abigail in the yard and stopped. You did the work, he said, just that, and then he kept walking. She decided that was good enough. Mrs. Arden made her a coat for the Denver winter. She said it was just practical that Denver was cold and Abigail didn't have sufficient clothing for it, and there was nothing sentimental about it whatsoever. Abigail thanked her without pointing out that the coat was beautifully made and had clearly taken considerable time and care because some kindnesses were best received quietly. Roy and Dale Sims. Each shook her hand the morning she left. Roy's handshake was about 3 seconds too long, which from Roy was the equivalent of a speech. And Jesse cried, which he tried to hide and completely failed at, and Abigail pretended not to see it and then hugged him anyway, which made him cry harder and then recover with the speed of a 19-year-old bouncing back from embarrassment. You'll be all right, she told him. Yes, ma'am, he said. I know, because of you. Because of you, she corrected. I just pointed. William walked her to the gate. They'd said the real things the night before privately, without audience. This walk was for the ordinary. Goodbye the public version, practical and manageable, the kind that didn't require either of them to manage their faces in front of the hands. At the gate, he held Clover's bridle while she mounted, which he'd done every single time she'd ridden out in 3 months, which she understood now as a gesture that had always been something other than courtesy. She looked down at him from the saddle. 6 months, she said. Maybe 8. I'll be here, he said. I know you will. She gathered her reins. When I come back. I'll ask you again, he said. Properly. With time and a clear head, and your father's name on the record the way it should be. And I'll say yes, she said. With the same. He looked up at her with the real expression. The open, unarmored one. The one she was carrying with her the same way she was carrying the folded survey notes and the Denver letter and the memory of her father's voice in the east pasture. Go do your work, Abigail Carter, he said, and come home when you're done. She turned Clover down the road. She didn't look back because she'd learned long ago that looking back slowed you down, and she had a long ride ahead of her. But she felt the ranch behind her the way you felt land. You knew thoroughly, not as a location, but as a living thing, pulling gently, patient, waiting. She rode toward Denver with the morning opening up in front of her, and the sound of the East Creek still in her ears, running free and clean, and exactly where it was supposed to be. The Denver engagement lasted 7 months, She worked across 11 properties in 3 counties, walking ground that had been surveyed wrong and telling the truth about where the lines actually were. She testified twice in proceedings connected to the Alderman criminal case. She found on the 8th property, she assessed a water rights error that had nothing to do with Alderman and everything to do with a 40-year-old surveying mistake that had cost a family 3 generations of argument with their neighbor, and she resolved it in 2 weeks, and the 2 families who'd been enemies since before she was born shook hands for the first time. She sent letters back to Hawthorne Ranch. She sent them to William, and she sent a separate one every month to Jessie, and occasionally one to Mrs. Arden, which Mrs. Arden received and read and mentioned to no one, but that Abigail suspected she kept. William wrote back. His letters were not long. He was not a man of elaborate written language. But they were consistent, and they were honest, and they contained things like, "The north fence is repaired. 42 head rotated through the east pasture this month. You were right about the grass," which was from William Hawthorne, essentially a sonnet. "And occasionally I think about you every day. I thought you should know." She wrote back, "I think about you every day too. The work here is good. I'll be home by spring." He wrote, "I'll be here." She wrote, "I know." The letter from Garrett Cole arrived in February, and she read it 3 times in the rented room in Denver before she understood that the shape of her life had just changed again. The court had ruled on the Carter property. The foreclosure proven fraudulent on the basis of Pickett's testimony, the Frost letter, and the altered boundary documentation had been voided. The deed had reverted to the estate of Daniel Carter, and the estate of Daniel Carter had one heir. Her father's land was hers, 430 acres. The water source that hadn't dried in 30 years. The house she'd grown up in, which the bank had let stand because no one had found a buyer willing to take land in active legal dispute. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done since the morning after her father's funeral, when she'd stood alone in the empty farmhouse and understood that he was really gone. She cried. Not the managed, careful kind. The real kind. The full-body kind. The kind that had been building for a year behind all the work and the determination and the forward movement that hadn't left any room for grief. She cried for her father and for the years and for the land and for all the nights she'd spent in narrow beds, telling herself she was strong enough. She cried because she'd been strong enough, and it had worked, and her father's name was on the record, and his land was coming home, and he wasn't here to see it, and that was the part she didn't know how to carry. She cried until she was done. Then she washed her face. Then she finished her last 2 weeks of work in Denver with the same thoroughness she'd brought to every day of the engagement, and on the last day, she received her full compensation and shook hands with the consortium's lead attorney, who told her she was the best land assessor he'd worked with in 20 years of practice, which she accepted with a nod and without deflection, because her father had also taught her to receive a true compliment without diminishing it. Then she rode south. She arrived at Hawthorne Ranch on a morning in late March when the weather was doing the unpredictable thing it always did. At the edge of spring, cold, 1 hour almost warm the next, the sky unable to decide what it wanted. She rode through the gate without announcement. She wasn't halfway to the barn before Jessie appeared from somewhere at a run, which told her someone had been watching the road. "She's back!" Jessie shouted, and she heard it echo off the outbuildings, and then there were people Roy and Dale emerging from the southfield. Mrs. Arden appearing on the porch, with an expression of profound relief, badly disguised as composed normality. Cody walked out of the barn and looked at her and said, "East pasture is fine. Creek's running good. 47 head made it through winter." 47, she said. "That's better than I projected." "I know," he said. And there was something in his voice that was the closest Cody Marsh would ever come to, "I missed you," and she understood it perfectly. She dismounted and handed Clover to Jessie, who was already reaching for the bridle, and she looked around the yard. William was not there. Jessie read her face. "He's in the east pasture," he said. "He's been out there most mornings." She walked out of the yard and took the familiar path to the east range, the one she'd walked 100 times in her 3 months at the ranch, and she came around the bend where the creek turned, and the grass was thick and green, and the north edge had fully recovered better than she'd projected, lush in a way that meant 47 head through winter made complete sense. He was standing at the creek's edge. He heard her coming, he always heard things approaching, and he turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. 7 months. He was the same, and not the same, a little more weathered. Maybe the lines around his eyes a degree deeper. But his eyes were the same. Creek water in winter, gray and clear and direct. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," she said. He crossed the ground between them in 5 steps. "The land," he said. "Cole told me." "Mine," she said. "Officially. My father's name on the record." Something moved across his face that she'd never seen on it before. Relief and joy, and something that was almost grief for her grief, which was the specific thing you felt when you loved someone and watched them carry loss and couldn't take it from them. "Your father would be proud," he said. "He would," she agreed. Her voice was steady. She'd done the crying in Denver. She'd done it properly, and now she could hold this moment without it splitting. "Abigail," he said. "William," she said. "I said I'd ask you again," he said. "Properly, with time and a clear head." "You did say that." "I have time," he said. "I have a clear head." He was very still. "Do you?" She looked at him. At the east pasture. At the creek running the way it was supposed to run. At the whole shape of everything they'd built, not just the ranch, not just the legal case, not just the work, but the thing between them that had started with her jumping in front of his horse at a broken bridge, and had become over 7 months and 11 properties, and 47 head of winter cattle, and a stack of letters that she'd kept every single one, of something she couldn't have named at the beginning, but could name now without hesitation. "I have a clear head," she said. "Ask me." "Will you marry me?" he said. No preamble, no decoration, just the words plain and fully meant the way William Hawthorne always said the things that mattered. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago standing at a broken bridge in the mud, screaming at a stranger's horse, not knowing that the man in the saddle was the same man who would stand here and look at her like this. She thought about her father, about land and water and the truth of things. She thought, yes, obviously yes. "You have known this for months, Abigail Carter." "Yes," she said. He let out a breath. She hadn't known he'd been holding it. Yes, she said again, because it deserved to be said twice. He reached out and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it in the east pasture the day before she left for Denver. Simple and sure, like something that had always been true and just needed time to be recognized. She held his hand back. The creek ran. The cattle moved in the far field, somewhere behind them. Jesse was probably listening from behind the nearest fence post and would deny it completely, and Roy and Dale were almost certainly pretending to check the fence, and Mrs. Arden was most likely standing at the kitchen window telling herself she was just watching the weather. And Abigail Carter stood in the east pasture of Hawthorne Ranch on a morning in late March, with her hand in the hand of the man she loved on land she'd helped restore in a place she'd earned her way into with every careful, stubborn, necessary ounce of herself. And she thought, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like when the right person finds you. Not the person who pities your circumstances. Not the person who admires your suffering. The person who watches you work and thinks there. That one. That is someone worth knowing. She had spent years being invisible. Years of being looked through and talked past and judged by the shape of her body and the size of her loss and the loudness of other people's opinions about what she was and wasn't worth. And then she'd screamed at a stranger's horse on a broken bridge in the mud, and the stranger had gotten off his horse and listened to her, and everything that mattered had started from there. She looked at William. "I want to go see the Carter land," she said. "When you have time, I want to go walk it." "When do you want to go?" he said. "Next week," she said. "I want to take Clover and go walk every acre of it and decide what to do with it." "What are your options?" he said. "I could sell it," she said, "or lease it, or work it myself, which would be complicated from here." She paused. "Or I could turn it into something my father always wanted it to be, demonstration land." A working example of correct water management and soil care for ranchers who want to learn. A place that teaches people to read the land instead of fight it. William was quiet for a moment. "That's what your father talked about," he said slowly. "I remember years ago when I bought the horses from him. He talked about something like that. A school almost, for land management." "He never had the time or the resources," she said. "But the land is still there, and I have both now." "You'd need people to run it," he said. "Staff." "Eventually," she said. "It's not a next week project. It's a 5-year project. You'd be splitting your time," he said, "between that land and this one." "They're 4 hours apart," she said. "It's manageable." He looked at her with the expression she'd been receiving for 7 months, first in person, and then in her memory of him during the Denver months, the one that was made entirely of specific, clear, unambivalent regard. "You've been planning this since Denver," he said. "Since February," she said, "when Cole's letter arrived." "Of course you have," he said. "Is that all right?" "Abigail." His voice was very gentle. "You just said yes to marrying me. You can plan anything you want." She laughed, the real kind, and he smiled the real smile, the one she'd seen exactly 4 times and intended to spend the rest of her life making sure she kept seeing, and pulled her toward him with the hand he was holding, and she went, and they stood together in the east pasture with the creek running and the spring coming on, uncertain and wonderful all around them. This was not the story anyone in Sutter's Creek would have written for Abigail Carter. Not the ones who'd called her the fat girl who'd never find a husband. Not the ones who'd laughed when she warned them about the bridge. Not the ones who'd handed her kitchen work when she was worth so much more because they'd looked at her body and decided they already knew the whole story. They hadn't known the story. The story was this: a woman who paid attention when everyone else was looking elsewhere. A woman who put her hands on the truth and held on. A woman who lost everything and rebuilt it, not because a man saved her, but because she saved herself first and then found a man worth standing beside. Her father had told her once when she was 12 and crying over something she couldn't now remember, "Abby, the land doesn't care how big you are or how small. The land only cares whether you're honest with it. You be honest with this ground and it'll give you everything it has." She had been honest, and it had given her everything. She was standing on it now. She was home.